Chapter 641. Gu Heng was handling the documents at hand while listening to the incessant complaints of General Hans from the speakerphone. "Commander Gu, are you even listening to what I'm saying?" "Of course I am listening," Gu Heng replied, indicating he was still there. "But I feel like you're not taking my concerns seriously. I need troops, more troops. We need to at least double the size of the Salvation Army, or we cannot continue to guarantee control over the Bottom Nest district. My troops are too dispersed, I cannot keep an eye on so many people, and we suffer losses when we are attacked." Hans had started again. Ever since a month ago when he entered Minjian City with his troops and fell into an endless battle for public security, he had made many calls to Gu Heng, requesting reinforcements. Gu Heng completely understood. The Star Realm Army combined with the Salvation Army amounted to 40 million people, which seemed plentiful. But in comparison, Minjian City had a population of 4 billion. The chaotic conditions of the Bottom Nest district practically required a large number of troops in nearly every block to maintain martial law. A strict martial law strategy had caused the troops to be severely dispersed. Often a battalion stationed in a district with over 100,000 people would have no major problems if facing a direct enemy assault, as the enemy couldn't amass enough firepower to resist the military. The problem was the soldiers on guard, patrolling, or on duty, who could easily fall victim to an ambush around the corner. Military vehicles could encounter roadside bombs within a few steps out. Those gangs as well as the rebel army didn't want to give up control over their own territories. No surprise Hans was complaining non-stop. In the past month, they had lost thousands of men. This number was certainly not on the same level as during the decisive battle when an entire division was wiped out in a few hours, but the loss of personnel was significant nonetheless. The Salvation Army fared slightly better, but there were already many grievances among Hans's elite troops. After the big battle, they had wanted to go home, but instead, they were sent to fight in a security war. The casualties weren't so much the issue, but the key was the constant anxiety whenever they went out, which took a huge toll on their spirits. Quite a few were saying that they would rather launch a proper fight than continue this way. Hans hoped for reinforcements not because he couldn't control the situation, but because he wanted to give his troops a chance to properly rotate and rest. Gu Heng was well aware of all of these issues. Yet, he continued to reject Hans's request over and over again. Martial law was just a temporary measure. If the solution to the security war was to rely on the military in the long term, then there was no point in proceeding. No amount of troops would be sufficient and the root cause of the problems would remain unsolved. Could martial law be maintained for a few months, a few years, even a lifetime? Gu Heng had long thought of the real means to resolve the issue. It was time to send General Hans, full of complaints, on his way and for Gu Heng to meet with the person who could truly address the issue. There was a large group of people. Among them were alliance officials from Rage Owl Star and Hajian Star, as well as those who had performed well in Minjian City in recent months and had appeared on Lambert's list, the Blue List. Among them were people from the Alliance Foreign Affairs Department, responsible for external communication, exchanges, peace offers, and negotiations, led by Nikola Salihovic. He was to travel through the Lower Nest District and Bottom Nest District to negotiate with powers worth saving, in hopes of peacefully dissolving them or incorporating them into Karolya's new government. Among those worth saving, the rebel army were in greater numbers. The rebel forces in Nest capital typically referred to themselves as the rebel army. Some were radical, not recognizing the rule of the emperor or the Karolya government. The more rebellious ones even denied their faith in the emperor. Others were more conservative, merely fighting to negotiate better real benefits for the people and territories under their power. The reasons for the rebel army's appearance, regardless of whether these were dirty or noble, essentially boiled down to one point: life had become unbearable, and they had rebelled. But Gu Heng saw this as an opportunity for reconciliation. Now, after being beaten, many of them couldn't even act openly anymore. It was time for Salihovic to act. If he could negotiate and incorporate them into the planetary government system, then they would be directly absorbed, and martial law could gradually be lifted to see how things went. Problems like gangs, regional monopoly alliances, cults, these might be more complex than the rebel army. Their demands were more complicated, their appetites bigger. Especially the cults, which virtually lacked any foundation for negotiation. But no matter the target, the many hands drawn from the Foreign Affairs Department and the Commerce Department, led by Salihovic, had the task of creating different plans according to the characteristics and demands of different forces. Those who could be integrated would be integrated, those who couldn't would be decisively destroyed. Salihovic's work was important, but not the most crucial. Whether incorporating after successful negotiations or rebuilding after destructive strikes following failed negotiations, both required a second wave of people. The Alliance Premier, Lady Asana, had already arrived in Karolya. A month prior, with Gu Hang as the governor, Karolya had officially joined the Alliance, the Planetary organization. Naturally, the Alliance Premier had to visit this suddenly emerged territory with a population 80 times larger than the original Alliance. Chapter 642. But what could she possibly do alone? Even though she had transferred quite a few people from the government system of the Twin Stars within the Alliance, that was hardly enough even for Karolya, let alone Minjian City with a population of 4 billion. It was like trying to extinguish a car fire with a cup of water. No matter how reliable and developed the Alliance's civil servant system might be, it couldn't handle a sudden expansion in management scale by dozens of times. In the end, managing Karolya would still depend on the local Karolya people. For this reason, after the war ended, Gu Hang established 5 loyal air academies and 5 comprehensive academies in Minjian City. The expense of the academies was not significant, just find a local building, and instructors could be summoned from Rage Owl Star. The grant expenditure was only about 1,000 points each, which was insignificant for Gu Hang, who controlled millions of grant points. However, training the personnel was a big issue. Minjian City's original administrative bureaucrats and public servants numbered about 2 million. It seemed like a huge number, but it was actually far from sufficient. In Gu Hang's plan, the number of public servants needed to expand to at least 0.3% of the total population. That meant 12 million public servants. Even in a habitat like Nest Capital, where the population density is extremely high, and the corresponding number of public servants required could be greatly reduced, it would still need to reach at least 7 to 8 million people to ensure control of the entire Nest Capital as Gu Hang wished. No matter what, the current 2 million administrative personnel were definitely not enough, not to mention that among these 2 million there was a lot of dross. That was where Azania's work came in. She needed to recruit numerous administrative personnel and implement the Alliance's administrative system. Of course, it certainly couldn't be done in a few months. Recruiting and training millions of reliable administrative personnel could not be accomplished overnight. Even the current ranking system executed by the Alliance on the Twin Stars couldn't be copied over all at once. It was too expensive. However, some emergency measures could be put into place first. The primary issue was not the capability of the administrative personnel but their loyalty. For this, Gu Hang spent a total of 400,000 grant points. 40,000 administrative personnel were trained in the 5 loyal air academies, costing 10 points per person, in a span of 1 week, over the course of several months. This was considered an emergency measure. In the future, the millions of public servants needed by Minjian City couldn't possibly all undergo soldier token training and be endowed with the level of loyalty akin to a political commissar. Moreover, even training someone to be a political commissar could ensure loyalty but not job competency. But for emergencies, it was sufficient. Azania's current task was this: to form 40,000 task forces centered around these 40,000 administrative personnel. These trained individuals would play a central role in the task forces, which would also include over 20 people each to assist them, under their supervision. These people would then be dispatched to all areas that had been negotiated over, incorporated, or cleansed to begin their work. Their main duties included registering the population of each district, promoting the Alliance's policies, distributing basic supplies, organizing labor production, and organizing trade and commerce. These were their primary responsibilities. Of course, the most important of these was organizing labor production. No matter how well Gu Hang's alliance had developed over the years, it definitely couldn't support Karolya. There were simply too many people on this planet, and in the end, they would have to rely on themselves for subsistence. This so-called labor production and trade and commerce mainly depended on what these districts were originally doing. But to be honest, in areas like Bottom Nest District and Lower Nest District, there were few decent industries to begin with. But it doesn't matter, if it exists, it will be nationalized and continue operating. Workers' treatment and enterprise benefits are guaranteed, with the generated profits distributed to the workers according to the Alliance's rank policies, and the remaining portion remitted. As for the places that lack such facilities, that's where Azania's leadership comes into play, namely, industrial transfer. In recent months, fleets of starships from Rage Owl Star have arrived. Many sectors identified in preliminary research as suitable for development on Karolya, and which were experiencing production capacity overflow on Rage Owl Star, have thus had large segments of their industrial lines dismantled and relocated here. As a result, Rage Owl Star has been bustling with activity lately. Many production lines, previously sealed in Wujiarong's research institutes and pulled out from Mother Machine black boxes, but unable to be launched due to raw material issues, workforce shortages, or structural industrial problems, were shipped en masse on the GU commercial firm's transport ships to Karolia. The most typical among these were the low-end military industries, rifles, bullets, towed field guns, artillery shells, bullet-resistant inserts. These technically less sophisticated industries were perfect for the managed blocks within Minjian City. Another particularly important industry was the synthetic starch production line, along with the corresponding organic waste recycling facilities. What exactly is organic fertilizer? Let's not delve into that, as it's somewhat unpleasant. Despite industrial farming reforms in Green Valley region on Rage Owl Star and the great harvests on Heijian Star in recent years leading to ample food reserves, one must economize the transported foodstuffs, as relying solely on external supplies is unrealistic. On the other hand, the Alliance can't simply inject all of the food into Karolia either, as strategic reserves are necessary. Under the conditions present in Minjian City's Bottom Nest district, to feed so many people, reliance on mass-produced synthetic starch is inescapable. But coming back to the topic, regardless of the raw materials used, the synthetic starch produced in the end is indistinguishable. If there really are several blocks without any industrial development, the Alliance would also send over some industries that could be considered mid-end. Iron bulls, hunter vehicles, engineering machinery manufacturing, Strider armored vehicle production lines, collection, processing, and smelting of metal scrap. These industries required a considerable number of workers, often attracting enough to establish a large heavy industry factory capable of employing workers from several blocks. Such actions are not solely to support the construction of Minjian City. For heavy industry, relocating to a location with denser population and lower costs also has its advantages, enabling significant cost reduction and a faster pace of production expansion. In cases where local research groups, having performed their on-site audits, found a region unsuitable for development with no support for industrial lines from the Alliance, there was still another way. Finding work across blocks is one option. Relying on a large factory with one employed person per household, secured with a job rank, was just enough to prevent starvation. Moreover, not everyone had to work in the factories. The remaining people could take up various service-oriented ancillary trades such as working in canteens, clothing, catering, transport teams, construction workers, and so on. If all else fails, the entire block's surplus population would be relocated. Of course, this also required screening. Those without issues could be directly sent to Rage Owl Star or Heijian Star, where there is still a significant demand for workers. In Gu Hang's view, although Nest Capital was specially built to accommodate high-density populations, the density had become excessively high. Karolia's environment was long incapable of supporting it. The large-scale migration of Karolia's population to other planets of the Alliance would be a long-term policy for the future. However, not just anyone can migrate to the twin stars. For instance, some blocks suffer from severe cult activities. After a thorough cleanup, the remaining populace, genuinely less tarnished by the cult but who have indeed followed it in the past, would be concentrated and sent to immigration bases. Minjian City already has such a massive facility designed for temporary accommodation of human taxes for the imperial tax. These people would then be used to pay the tax on the next visit of the imperial tax fleet. Although Karolia doesn't currently pay taxes, it can choose to do so, after which it can exchange the taxes paid for tax currency. These are the fundamental solutions Gu Hang has put forward to end the security war, economic development. With full stomachs and a future to look forward to, will the people, well-fed and sturdy, take up arms against the Star Realm Army or the Salvation Army's guns and cannons with their own flesh and blood? Chapter 643. Malka caressed the brand on the back of his left hand, as if he could still recall the searing pain from when the hot iron was pressed against his skin years ago. He was a member of the Branding Hand Gang, and as the name implies, this gang's main characteristic was branding its members' hands with a scorching iron to signify their affiliation. The gang wasn't large, with influence spanning only 2 or 3 blocks, but it wasn't small either, as more than 300,000 people within their territory depended on them. Only, their recent days hadn't been easy. Or rather, since military governance began, no one's days had been easy. At the start of military control, the Branding Hand Gang initially thought it wouldn't be much different from the strict management incidents that occasionally happened in the past. However, their expectations were quickly shattered. The duration of military governance had exceeded their imagination by far. Moreover, the intensity of the crackdown was unbearable for them. After a period of lying low, the branding hand gang could no longer hold back. They started to fire from the shadows, causing riots. These tactics greatly troubled an infantry division of the Star Realm army stationed within their turf. In about a month, the gang's attacks and riots resulted in hundreds of casualties among the Star Realm army, and although their own losses were much greater, to them it was still worth it, it still felt like victory. Then, they got intoxicated by this victory and attempted to ambush a patrolling infantry squad. This operation seemed foolproof in their eyes. Less than 30 Star Realm army warriors, on street patrol. They had already scoped out the squad as the best target. Once the fight started, it would take at least 15 minutes for backup from other areas to arrive. So, next to the patrol vehicles, roadside bombs exploded in succession, stopping the military vehicles, and then from all directions of the street, from hiding places in houses, 300 to 400 shooters from the branding hand gang surged out, completely surrounding the Star Realm army squad. Bullets flew in from every direction, and the situation quickly deteriorated. Originally, they intended to finish the fight within 10 minutes, allowing a bit of time to retreat. But in reality, the battle was practically over by the 6th minute. Only, the outcome was the complete opposite. They inflicted casualties on 7 Star Realm army soldiers, while the gang's shooters left behind more than 170 bodies. The heavy casualties caused the shooters to break within minutes, leading to an uncontrolled, complete rout. No backup was needed. After being ambushed and hit by roadside bombs, less than 30 Star Realm army warriors with light weapons versus 300 to 400 gunmen resulted in 7 casualties on their side and 170 dead on the enemy's. Such a military outcome left the entire branding hand gang in utter shock. Am I fighting Superman? How could the disparity be so great? Before they could even catch their breath from the shock, they were hit with a severe sweep, and even their lair was wiped out. From then on, they thoroughly extinguished any thoughts of confronting the military forces, hiding like rats, taking their shots in the dark, and retreating immediately if they missed, unwavering in their decision not to engage any squad of the Star Realm army that consisted of more than 5 soldiers. Though they claimed such a thing, being pushed to the edge, their options had become ridiculously limited, and the suppression left them extremely frustrated. Things got even worse after a so-called Alliance New Government work group moved into the district. A massive amount of food was distributed, and the new government's policies were disseminated. Abandoned factories were reopened, and these people also organized transportation and construction teams. As long as you joined, you got a job, and the whole family had a fixed job grade. Those with formal jobs could reach the so-called E4 rank, secure in their sustenance and able to support a family. Family members could reach E2 rank, ensured at least a subsidy. Additionally, once your rank was set, you could compete for work and climb the ranks. Even those without jobs could declare what they wanted to do. Groups of girls, women, children willing to take orders on the streets, fixing clothes, that was considered having a job, allowing them to move up a rank. Organizing everyone to do this was also regarded as having a job. And if all else failed, enlisting as a soldier was also an option. The Alliance's recruitment center was always seeking soldiers, offering better conditions than before. In short, everyone now had food to eat. Initially, due to a long-standing distrust of the government, the public was particularly skeptical about the policy promotion. But once tangible food was in hand and one could choose weekly wage payments, the doubts couldn't be said to have been entirely eliminated, but they had certainly become much lighter. While they weren't living in luxury, at least they could fill their stomachs, and they could avoid the cold. Now, the branding hand gang couldn't even think about coaxing the public into risky endeavors. Instead, many peripheral members within their own ranks chose to leave the gang. Even, traitors had extended into the core members who had been branded. If the previous military governance was merely tightening their necks, causing them pain and discomfort, unable to act, then now, it was like being stabbed directly in the heart. They had truly reached a point of desperation, but what could they do if they couldn't fight back? Malka, as a core member of the gang, was sent out by the boss. Chapter 644. After untold hardships, having passed through numerous military control zones, he went to see a highly influential person. This person had always supported the development of their gang and reaped benefits from their activities, who could be regarded as the power behind them. However, the mansion he had visited only once before now presented a scene of decay, with even the smell of blood lingering. It was said that the Integrity Commission of the new government had conducted a sweep there. Then Malka could only slink back, defeated. On the road there and back, Malka saw many things that happened within the military control zones. He had once visited most of these places, but now, seeing them again, they were completely different from his memories. These changes, reflected in his heart, quietly shifted his own thoughts. Back with the gang, he was summoned by the boss for questioning. "What did Mr. Olan say?" the boss asked impatiently. "Mr. Olan is finished," Malka said. He clearly recounted to the boss everything he had seen and heard. After listening, the boss's face showed panic and resentment. Damn it! He was useless. Bragging all day about how awesome he was, how influential, what a formidable figure he was, but in the end, when the alliance came, wasn't he slaughtered like a dead dog? After a tirade and venting his emotions, the boss turned to another person and asked, "What about the contacts you were supposed to make with our good neighbors? How did that go?" The so-called good neighbors referred to several forces around the neighborhood where they operated. There were rebel groups and other gangs. Their relationships with each other had been a mix of good and bad in the past, but the boss believed that in these times of life and death, they should unite to weather the crisis. Thus, he had sent people to make contact with these good neighbors to align and leverage their connections. However, he received bad news once again. "No one is willing to partner with us. Pingkong Army said they are negotiating with the government. Haifeng Gang seems to have disappeared completely, as if they've been wiped out, and the Pingan Army has fully capitulated, accepting the alliance government's terms. I barely made it back alive from there. Fuck." The boss stood up and paced back and forth anxiously. He muttered a lot to himself. "We can't just let this go. I need to think if there's any other way. We can't let those bastards just go work for the government. Attack, intimidate. Any transport convoy that passes, blow it up." From the boss's mouth spewed a stream of vile plans. Malka sighed. He spoke up, "Boss, let's surrender." "What?" The boss's gaze suddenly swung toward Malka, staring at him intently. He had always ruled his gang with brutality, never allowing a voice other than his own within the gang. Usually, under such a gaze, Malka wouldn't dare to speak. But today, he dared to say, "Let's surrender, there's no chance of winning. On the way here, I saw too many military control zones, not just here in Minjian City, everywhere is undergoing reform. I think, the new government is really determined to completely transform Nest Capital. Honestly, I don't think that's a bad thing, if everyone could live a peaceful life. Do you want to die?" The boss pulled out his signature weapon. It was a specially modified hand cannon, with a split barrel that could fire 3 large-caliber shotgun shells at once. Malka had seen its power firsthand. One shot could shatter a person's entire upper body. But Malka's face showed little fear. He just sighed. Bang! The gunshot rang out. Malka wasn't hurt, but a hole had been blasted into the back of the head of the branding hand gang boss. Behind him was someone holding a gun, with wisps of blue smoke still rising from the barrel. The boss was killed in a brutal manner, which gave the other brothers in the room a jolt. Some were lost, some at a loss, and some instinctively pulled out their guns. Malka shouted, "Put your guns down. You killed the boss." Someone yelled. "He was leading us all to a dead end." Malka's eyes glared over, "Do you want to be buried with him?" The person was at a loss for words. Who would want to die? You've all seen what the streets are like. Ask yourselves, why would anyone follow us if they could live peacefully? Other gangs, the rebel army, it's either death or surrender. The dead are forgotten, the living join the civilians in better days. They say being in a gang is carefree, but how many of us have truly lived carefree? What drove us to join gangs in the first place? Was it not because life was unbearable? Now that we can live, don't you want to? He, as the boss, could enjoy the best food and drink and was insatiably greedy. He refused to accept the government's terms. What about us? Why should we follow him to our deaths? If he was only greedy, if he was just not thinking straight, that would be one thing, but did you not hear what he just said? Aren't the people in the streets our own families and friends? Stop harboring pipe dreams. The era of gangs is over. Continuing like this, there is no way out. I plan to go to the government's work team now, to talk about the future of the branding hand gang. At best, we use the connections and favors we've built over the years in the streets to help people, and maybe even end up as officials. If not, we find other work. All of us are able-bodied, life won't be too hard. What if they insist on wiping us out? Then we are done for. Malka said emotionlessly, do you still not see the situation? If they want us dead, we are as good as dead already. It's just a matter of a few days sooner or later. The questioner fell silent. Do you have anything else to say? If not, I'm off. In the silence, someone threw out one more line, killed the boss just to take his place, hey? You're talking like you're the boss already, but no one's acknowledged you yet. Malka retorted, in a few days, the gang will be gone. Whoever wants to be the boss can have it. The events within the Branding Hand gang were just a microcosm. In General Han's eyes, all the changes were even clearer. Lately, he hadn't made any more complaint calls to Gu Hang. What was there left to complain about? Now that the mighty governor had brought in a bunch of reliable administrative personnel from who knows where, and they began working at the grassroots level by districts, the intensity of the peacekeeping battles that his troops faced had plummeted. The riots and attacks hadn't completely stopped, but at least they were mostly reduced. In some well-managed areas, the stationed troops were practically on vacation. And he, at last, could free up forces from some of the higher security areas to be redeployed to lower security ones. Some abandoned districts still required a stronger military response. Eradicating cults or obstinate gangs, forcibly breaking up crowds with military force, and transporting everyone to temporary resettlement areas. Although the present Minjian city was still far from being a pleasant place, Hans, as an outsider, could see clearly that everything here was rapidly improving. Could it be, after centuries of chaos, Karolia might genuinely undergo a revolutionary change under the hands of that young governor? Emotionally, he was reluctant to believe it. Those past impressions were too deeply ingrained in his mind. But rationally, he had to admit that everything could change. While he was contemplating this, he suddenly received another call from Gu Hang. General Hans, I am very pleased with your troops' work in Minjian City. You have 2 more months to deal with the situation inside Minjian City. After 2 months, you will be moved to a new nest capital. General Hans immediately put his contemplations aside. Damn it, they really don't treat people like humans, do they? Hadn't even rested a bit, and now off to a new place? Chapter 645. Upon receiving orders to split his forces and head to 2 different nest capitals, thousands of kilometers apart, to carry out military administration tasks, General Hans cursed under his breath. But his cursing didn't last long. Because care from Mr. Gu arrived before the military deployment commenced. The Dragonhawk Third Corps, numbering over 20 million people, was primarily stationed in Karolia. In the recent years, their personnel and equipment replenishments were supplied by the Fatches family. Of course, this supply actually involved submitting cost reports to the Military Affairs Department. The department wouldn't provide cash payments and instead counted it towards tax credits. For most planets, maintaining a Star Realm army was a cost-effective affair. Tax obligations existed regardless. It made more sense to invest in an army which could be used as a tax write-off and remained under local control. What could be wrong with that? The premise, however, hinged on the ability to keep the military in check. One slip-up, like the current situation, could leave the entire Dragonhawk Third Corps stranded on Karolia with no return in sight. And if Gu Hang wanted to retain these troops, he naturally had work to do. In the last major conflict, the Dragonhawk Third Corps had lost nearly 3 million soldiers. Gu Hang replenished all these personnel in one go with 3 million new recruits recently conscripted from Karolia itself. When General Hans first heard the news, especially the source of the new recruits, he was furious. But when he saw the quality of these soldiers, he shut his mouth. The quality of the recruits was absolutely up to standard, even far superior to those provided by the Fatches TriStar. The new soldiers that Fatches provided for his corps were from their Planetary Defense Force, usually with over 2 years of service and professional military training. Yet, even so, it was considered good if 20% met the Star Realm Army's standards. The remaining 80% needed further training. As a result, the overall quality of the Dragonhawk Third Corps was such that only about 60% met the Star Realm standard, with the remaining 40% falling short. However, the 3 million troops supplied by Mr. Gu were all up to standard, as confirmed by inspections conducted by Han's own people. He was initially incredulous at this result. How could anyone believe this? He couldn't help but suspect that Mr. Gu had somehow bought off his trusted officers. Then, after conducting his own random inspections, he had to admit that it was all true. How on earth did Mr. Gu find so many qualified soldiers on Karolia? Hans found it hard to comprehend. Moreover, Mr. Gu had supplied more than just troops. Within these 3 million, an entire army group was formed, consisting of 25 fully manned large infantry divisions, each with 44,000 soldiers, adopting the large division structure of the alliance. This structure emerged only during the Karolia conflict, after Li Kexi reported up the chain of command, consulted with Yan Fangxiu, and then submitted the proposal to Tadeus for a joint research on organization. Smaller divisions were indeed insufficient on the battlefield of Karolia. Armored composite brigades were fine, being elite armored forces and powerful assault units. However, infantry divisions, when facing a particularly intense and wide battlefield position, were undermanned with the previous alliance standard of about 14,000 soldiers. Thus, they had no choice but to adapt to the reality and create the large infantry division, a different organization from the regular infantry division. However, the alliance's large infantry divisions differed slightly from those of the Dragonhawk Legion. Although similar in the number of personnel, the divisions of the alliance possessed more firepower and a greater number of weapons and vehicles than those of the Dragonhawk. They had more artillery, were equipped with more infantry weapons, incendiary bombs, heavy grenade launchers, plasma guns, infantry mortars, all allocated down to company level. Plus, they had ample troop-carrying vehicles, enabling any infantry division to become completely motorized without the need for logistical support, operating solely at the division level. This meant that the cost of creating an alliance-style large infantry division amounted to 886,000 tax currency. For 25 divisions, that was over 20 million tax currency. Looking at this new army group, Hans could only pinch his nose and reluctantly admit it was excellent. Although this army group was a pure infantry artillery unit lacking armored capabilities, it was still more formidable than other infantry army groups within his own corps. The remaining 2 million were distributed throughout undermanned units within his corps. At this point, what more could Hans be dissatisfied with? 3 million high-standard soldiers, a fully manned and equipped army group without cutting any corners. The level of assistance was something he had never even experienced before. He even hesitated to make a phone call to Mr. Gu, subtly hinting at whether such an approach could be improper. "Brother, when you supply and reinforce the Star Realm army, do you really make no profit at all? Cutting corners with personnel, matching 3 million with another 3 million who don't meet training standards, skimping on equipment, inflating the numbers on paper. This way, those 3 million wouldn't simply cost 50 million tax currency, wouldn't you have to claim 100 million from the Military Affairs Department? Although the department wouldn't really pay out, the debt would allow your alliance to avoid taxes for 4 years. Why be so earnest?" Chapter 646. Regarding this, Gu Hang's response was, "General Hans, I must severely criticize you. How can you have such disloyal thoughts? I regard your legions as my own troops. You are fighting on my planet, so of course, I will support you without any reservation." After hearing this, Hans felt deeply ashamed to the extent that by the time he led his team to leave Minjian City for the other 2 nest capitals, he didn't dare to complain anymore. The situation in Minjian City, of course, couldn't be considered completely stable yet. In the past couple of days, there had been reports of more than a dozen serious incidents, including looting, damaging construction sites, and attacking civilians who had surrendered. Gaining the trust of the public and dismantling criminal forces still required time. It wasn't the case that policies could simply be announced and enforced and everything would immediately be resolved. Despite the administration system and organizing labor production seeming to progress vigorously and generally running smoothly, in reality, this was all built on the foundation of previously effective military control. Military control was still being maintained now, and serious incidents would occasionally occur. Once military control ceased and the police and security forces had not yet established a foothold, the nascent administrative system and economic system would likely struggle immensely. Gu Hang had no intention of ending military control. 20 million savior troops were still stationed in Minjian City, carrying out their control tasks. At the same time, the scale of the savior army would be further expanded, on one hand, to absorb the employed population, and on the other hand, expansion of the army was a requirement from Gu Hang himself. However, now that the situation was improving, there was no need to keep that many troops. The Star Realm army withdrew, taking with it a portion of the administrative personnel and started heading toward the surrounding 2 nest capitals. Those 2 nest capitals were estimated to each have a population of about 1 billion people, roughly 1,500 kilometers away from Minjian City. Each of them had several million native defense forces internally, responsible for suppressing locals. The planetary government had issued commands for all nest capitals to carry out clearance operations in the bottom nest district and lower nest district, and these commands had been communicated, but the outcome was far from clear. The remaining 38 nest capitals, although officers from the Alliance had been stationed there, had an average of only a work team of several dozen people in each capital. Taking over the power of the government was difficult. Those local power brokers were not pushovers. In fact, the task Gu Heng gave them was not to take over the cities. If it wasn't achievable, then they should take it slow, there was no rush. Even, at this stage, Karolia's original administrative system had started operating again at Gu Heng's instigation, which was tantamount to reaching a considerable degree of compromise with the power brokers of the other nest capitals. First, get the nest capitals up and running, allowing the Alliance government, which still bore the name of the planetary government temporarily, to issue some decrees to these capitals, that would be sufficient. As for the winds of reform, there was no rush to spread them globally. Gu Heng wanted to set a good example in Minjian City first, and incidentally also train enough administrative personnel. But one thing must be controlled immediately now. Military power. Gu Heng did not trust those power brokers to rebel openly, at least not until his blade truly fell upon them. The power brokers were different from the rebels and gangs in the bottom nest district and lower nest district. Their wealth and power could not exist outside of the official system. But no one could say for sure. What Gu Heng wanted was to ensure that even if these people were driven to desperation, they would pose no threat. Military power was the top priority. And for this matter, Gu Xing had already made preparations. The planetary defense force of Karolia had peaked at 150 million personnel, and even after a great battle and the reorganization of tens of millions of people into the Savior Army, there were still 130 million personnel. These troops, spread across all the major nest capitals, were the main force in stationing and suppressing the locals. However, these forces were also deeply tied to the power brokers within their respective nest capitals, at least more closely than Gu Heng, the foreign governor. To address this issue, Gu Heng had already laid the groundwork at the end of that great battle earlier. When various planetary defense forces were called back, they were deployed to locations different from their original bases. Moreover, a massive rotation of forces among the different nest capitals also took place. At that time, it didn't cause any particularly strong reactions. Firstly, the imminent danger of annihilation had preoccupied the elites, who were more concerned about survival than resistance. Secondly, as the commander-in-chief of the combat zone, Gu Heng made such decisions, and the local elites had no power to resist. Thirdly, to prevent collusion between the military and the elites, it was a tradition in Karolia to periodically rotate troops to different locations, an exercise that happened every few years. The rotations organized by Gu Heng were not unusual. After the rotation, even if the local elites wanted to reconnect with the military, it would take time. The primary goal of these working groups Gu Heng dispatched to each of the nest capitals was to take control of the military before the local elites could re-establish connections. They had certain innate advantages. Parts of the Rage Bear Legion and the Salvation Army would be allocated to accompany them to other nest capitals, serving as a show of force to stabilize the situation. Additionally, during the last major war, Gu Heng had intentionally planted his own people within the native defense army, who had won over a number of insiders. These individuals would assist the work groups in seizing control of the troops. Overall, while achieving this would not be easy, it was still highly feasible. Because these work groups had two of the most important weapons at their disposal. General Han's Dragonhawk Legion would not stay in any one nest capital for too long and would no longer implement strict military governance like that in Minjian City. His role was to lead the troops across the planet on a tour to support the Alliance officials stationed in each nest capital, helping them secure control over the troops. Furthermore, logistics support, personnel appointments, and officer promotions within the planetary defense forces of each nest capital were all still controlled by the new government. With these conditions and a careful, diligent approach, plus the moral high ground on their side, securing control over the military should not pose a significant problem. As for when the reforms occurring in Minjian City would be pushed out to all the nest capitals, that would have to wait until the early successes of the reform in Minjian City became apparent. Once that was established and Gu Heng's Salvation Army had expanded to a greater strength, capable of enforcing military governance throughout all nest capitals on the planet, it would be time to initiate global reform. By then, any opposition on the planet would be as good as a paper tiger. The upper echelons would see the example set by Minjian City, and those who cooperated with the new government could integrate into it, attaining high-ranking positions. They could keep their status, and although their treatment might decline, they would still hold significant power. They just needed to shift their mindsets and accept the rules of the Alliance, working in the manner prescribed by it. Those who did not cooperate and instead worked against them covertly, would face the harshest iron fist. Since then, Gu Heng had become somewhat more relaxed. Government work was still plentiful and burdensome. Nonetheless, it was clear that he could not govern the now immensely populous alliance single-handedly. His work was more about the big picture, designing the systemic framework. The specific tasks would be executed by the government. Multilevel governmental structures, manned by millions, even tens of millions of civil servants, were responsible for carrying out his will. Ozania had already submitted a timeline to Gu Heng. The first milestone for a successful reform in Minjian City was to make it self-sufficient, independent of aid from Rage Owl Star and Heijian Star within a year, and capable of exporting resources. Of course, this dependency refers to aid dependency, not normal trade. The demand for food in Karolia was enormous, and even with recycling technologies and the use of synthetic starch on a large scale, it was not enough. Synthetic starch still required raw materials. Normal imports were one aspect, but it was mainly that beyond imports, Minjian City needed to solve some of its own food requirements, such as utilizing soilless farming technology and potentially produce industrial goods that would match the value of the necessary consumption for a population of 4 billion. As long as that was achieved, the reform would be considered a success. The next steps would be to continuously improve productivity, raise the standard of living for the population, and provide resources to aid other nest capitals in their reforms. Directly exporting the resources needed for reforms from Minjian City clearly meant that the entire Karolia would be set on the right track as designed by Gu Heng. Chapter 647. The reforms in Karolia continued to progress. Although there were numerous difficulties, Gu Heng had never been particularly worried from the start. With the military, the treasury, and the pen in hand, there wasn't much that couldn't be managed. The military had always been Gu Heng's top priority, and naturally, this went without saying. Not to mention his own loyal troops, General Hans's Dragonhawk Legion also seemed obedient for the time being, obtaining control over the native defense army, which was more than 100 million strong, shouldn't pose much of a problem. At this point, the military could be considered stable. There was even less need to worry about the treasury. Karolia was as poor as a ghost, but with economic aid from the Alliance, industrial reforms and tax reductions from the human empire, all these powers lay in Gu Heng's hands, and with military backing, the treasury was also secure. With these in place, the progression of the reforms would be difficult, but the likelihood of failure wasn't high. The last item, the pen, also could not be neglected. It represents public opinion, the right to speak, ideology, it could be called anything, but in essence, it's about people's hearts. In fact, it is very important, in some ways even more so than the previous two. Just having guns and money isn't enough if the people's hearts aren't won over. Society would operate in a high consumption mode, which couldn't become the norm. Fortunately, the Alliance's governance system had always been quite good at capturing the hearts of the people. The development of productivity and the improvement of living standards would directly win over the most basic public support. The Alliance's propaganda and mobilization departments were also doing their work. Most importantly, they were tying these positive changes to the Alliance and Mr. Gu, naturally winning over the people's hearts. But that alone wasn't enough. Especially not in a place like Karolia. A point Gu Heng had not had the time to care about in the past was becoming increasingly important. That was the state religion. The state religion was a force within the empire that was easy to overlook but should never be neglected. They had a dark history, and under the strict laws of the empire, their power had been greatly diminished. They couldn't even muster an armed force but had to resort to forming the rather odd Battle Nun Association. Not to mention that 1/3 of the Battle Nun Association was under the command of the tribunal, another third directly obeyed the empire, and though the remaining third heeded the state religion, half of them were quite independent. Still, they should not be underestimated. The most important aspect was their influence over the hearts of the people. The entire human empire universally worshipped the emperor. From lowly peddlers to fearless heroes, from the impoverished masses to the upper echelons, from spiritual energy scholars to tribunal minions, who didn't utter the emperor bless. Even the deluded folks of the mechanical cult guild, who wouldn't dare alter their brains but wished to replace every other part of their body with mechanical components, acknowledged that the god of all machines they chanted about was an avatar of the emperor. The influence of the emperor was ubiquitous. And Karolia happened to be within the core area of the state religion of the recent star sectors, not for any particular reason other than its population. The state religion needed to expand its influence here, so they established a diocese with a grand cathedral hundreds of years ago and even stationed the Battle Nun Association of St. Mercy Lily here permanently. Though St. Mercy Lily was small, it was still a legitimate sisterhood. In Karolia, the state religion's priests truly went to the lowest levels of society. Some of the ascetic brethren, donning the simplest and shabbiest of robes, went into the lower districts to heal the sick, distribute food, act as mediators to resolve disputes. Of course, these were all secondary. What was most important was preaching and soothing the hearts of the people. In Gu Hang's observation, many of the members of the state religion, especially those in the upper ranks, were quite indulgent, which fit his stereotype of a decadent religious force. But objectively speaking, their actions throughout the long years in Karolia had indeed helped stabilize society and had also gained widespread acceptance among the people. However, Gu Hang had always been disinterested in religion and even felt a subtle aversion to it. Furthermore, within the highly centralized political ecology of the alliance, there had been no place for the power of the state religion from the very design of the system. In Karolia, it could no longer be like this. If the issue of religion was not handled properly, the alliance's reform policies in Karolia would not exactly be impossible to implement, but they would certainly be half as effective at twice the effort. After several rounds of internal discussions, Gu Hang and his officials had roughly formulated a plan. But before meeting with Karolia Bishop Zhao Qinghong, Gu Hang actually met with another person first. Introduced by the old acquaintance Superior Georgette, Gu Hang personally visited the leader of St. Mercy Lily, Superior Mrs. Medici. This was their second meeting. Mrs. Medici looked very old. According to her own words, she was 128 years old this year and had never undergone any life-extending procedures. This was quite rare, almost reaching the theoretical limit of the average human lifespan. Gu Hang believed that this might truly be the emperor's blessing. After all, he had seen how Georgette, when in battle, would extend ethereal golden wings behind her, cutting down enemies as easily as slicing vegetables, not inferior at all to battle group leader Madens from next door. Chapter 648. Medici was once a member of the Blood Rose sorority, and a distinguished war hero as well. Later on, due to ideological differences, she no longer identified with the overly intense and cruel philosophy of the Blood Rose. She and some like-minded individuals established a suborder under the Blood Rose, then separated to become what is now known as the Merciful Lily. Anyway, Gu Hang couldn't tell at all that this kind-hearted old lady before him had any connection with the Blood Rose, the feared executioner of the tribunal from the rumors. Sister Superior Medici, seeing that you are in good health makes me very happy, he said. Thank you, Mr. Gu, the old lady replied with a smile, but let's dispense with the pleasantries. Tell me, what brings you here? If it's about the state religion, there's no need. You should address matters concerning the state religion to Bishop Zhao. As for us, the Merciful Lily only does what we're supposed to do, we don't intervene in other matters. Hearing this, Gu Hang felt greatly relieved in his heart. Although it seemed Medici had noticed that he, the governor, cared about the influence of the state religion, and thus had made it clear to state the unpleasant matters up front, in reality, what Gu Hang wanted was this exact attitude. If that's the case, then nothing could be better. I've always esteemed the philosophy of the Merciful Lily to do what needs to be done, to do the right thing. The warriors of the sisterhood, fearless in sacrifice, have helped me greatly on Rage Owl Star and have made outstanding contributions on the battlefields of Karolia. I also know that when there is no warfare, the non-combatant sisters of the Merciful Lily descend into the depths to preach. In the future, I still hope that the Merciful Lily can play a corresponding role, as it will be of great help to the recovery of Karolia. We will, Medici promised. But in reality, she was somewhat uncertain about the governor's intentions. Had he paid a personal visit just to say this? Without the governor mentioning it, they would have done the same. They had already been doing so for 30 years. And Gu Hang continued to speak. I will provide all the necessary assistance to the sisterhood. Your development in Karolia, and indeed across the entire alliance, will receive strong support from the alliance government. We will provide all the necessary conditions to aid the missionaries of the sisterhood. The sisterhood can further expand its scale, and you can recruit whomever you wish. You can start sister classes within our schools, he said. If your sisterhood needs custom-powered armor, I can find a way to provide it for you. You've already seen my soldiers. The Servant God series of powered armor performs better than the Universal series typically used by Merciful Lily, more suitable for the sisters to operate. If the sisterhood lacks funds, the corresponding support, the alliance can even provide it by way of donation. Wait a moment, Mr. Gu, Medici hastily interrupted. Although Mr. Gu talked about a series of help, why did it all sound so alarming to her? At her age, she had long stopped believing that there was such a thing as a free lunch in this world. Accepting these things would surely come with a price to pay. I'm old, Mr. Gu, Medici said, I find it very hard to think through the intricacies that lie behind many issues now. Let's be direct. Frankly speaking, everything you're offering is exactly what the sisterhood most needs and cares about. What exactly do you want the merciful lily to do? Gu Hang said with a smile, it's simple. Just continue doing what the sisterhood has been doing. Aiding the sick and weak, punishing the wicked, spreading the gospel. Isn't that the purpose of the merciful lily? That's all. That's all. Gu Hang's smile grew even brighter. Just do these and nothing more. There's no need for the sisterhood to involve itself in matters it shouldn't, don't you think? Medici understood. She couldn't help but ask, are you planning to move against Bishop Zhao? Of course not, Gu Hang replied, I am a governor utterly loyal to the empire, how could I be an enemy of the state religion? I've always respected the role of the state religion in planetary construction. However, the state religion should operate under the framework of the alliance to better collaborate, don't you agree? Medici sighed, if it's too much, it won't do. Gu Hang knew the deal was done. Her words won't do were clearly an acquiescent attitude. It won't do too much, wouldn't that be fine? Gu Hang stood up with a smile, rest assured. I sincerely wish the sisterhood a prosperous future because this cruel universe greatly needs the light of the merciful lily. There's a saying, one who takes advantage is indebted, and so was the merciful lily. Having been promised various supports, and even future donations by Gu Hang, they were likely to tacitly approve whatever the alliance planned to do next. But there was more. After accepting the various aids from the alliance, how could the merciful lily stay out of many matters? 100 sets of the alliance's stock servant god-powered armors were soon delivered, and they had been adorned with the merciful lily's white and green colors well in advance before being shipped out. Furthermore, the promised sister classes and the promised missionary guardians have all been put in place. What could possibly prevent that from happening? Wearing my servant god, would they not work for me? The nuns sent down for missionary work were quickly pulled together by the alliance officials and sent to various production teams, engineering groups, and factories to work. Preaching and spiritual consolation were obviously part of their duties, and incidentally, why not address work-related injuries and boost the morale of the workers? That's only right, isn't it? With the nuns working, the battle nuns, as sisters wielding military power, couldn't just stand by and watch, could they? When several dozen battle nuns were stationed in one neighborhood, then couldn't a significant part of the alliance's military administration troops be withdrawn? As Gu Hang had said, he didn't need the Holy Lily of Mercy to do anything extra. As long as they did their jobs well, that in itself was a great help. And the Holy Lily of Mercy was the most important force controlled by Karolia's state religion. It wasn't just about military power. The sisterhood had always had a significant role in consoling the hearts of the people in Karolia, especially in Minjian City. And once they were not causing problems, Gu Hang had less to worry about when taking action against the state religion. A series of decrees were then promulgated. Of course, Gu Hang wasn't aiming to abolish the state religion, but under the alliance system, the state religion should act under the management of the alliance. They no longer had economic privileges and were forbidden from intervening in production. They could not force, semi-force, or induce donations. Secret missionary work and private gatherings were prohibited. Corrupt elements should be eradicated. The funds and resources distributed by the superior state religion were not interfered with by the alliance, but their use had to be reported to the alliance. This series of measures almost stepped on the tail of the state religion, and Zhao Qinghong was so anxious that he came looking for Gu Hang in a hurry. He had no cards left to play. Even if he wanted to resist, how could he? Without military or financial control, even if he wanted to stir the hearts of the people, the efforts of the Holy Lily of Mercy in maintaining peace for the alliance greatly diminished his influence. Gu Hang's attitude towards Zhao Qinghong remained cordial, but the aforementioned regulations were set in stone, and Gu Hang had no intention of compromising. However, he also relaxed some aspects. For instance, in the area of missionary work, Gu Hang was willing to provide strong support for the state religion. The belief in the emperor could significantly suppress the corrosion of cults. At the same time, the alliance was also willing to provide a special fund for religious development. Gu Hang essentially had one demand: money could be given, support could be provided, but they had to do their jobs honestly and contribute to the development of Karolia. As for abnormal economic privilege and meddling in politics through sectarian gatherings, that was not allowed. Zhao Qinghong compromised. Even the last stipulation, that the funding from the higher-ups of the state religion also needed to be under the supervision of the alliance government, he accepted. In many worlds where the state religion was weak, such demands from the local governments were common and not considered excessive. If you don't want to cause trouble, what kind of funding would be difficult to disclose to the government? Chapter 649. Gu Heng had never underestimated the state religion, even though they lacked nominal military force, their greatest weapon was influence. And that in itself was terrifying. If the pontiff of the state religion, or a particularly influential cardinal archbishop, truly got tough and declared someone or some place heretical, or made a proclamation about a region occupied by aliens, the chaos cult, the onset of a crusade was very likely. The bishops might not have regular armed forces other than the sisterhood, but they could invoke the name of a crusade to rally all the governors and imperial military forces across several star sectors. And when they wanted to do so, they often succeeded. There were many such instances in the history of the empire. This was not a matter of authority, commands, or coercion, but rather the persuasive power brought about by influence. It was precisely because of this influence and persuasion that governments at all levels from the central to the local were actually quite wary of them. Not bad at all, considering that after the political turmoil that affected the whole empire, they had already been heavily restrained, and yet they still retained such substantial influence. Who wouldn't be afraid of that? In regions where the state religion was strong, not to mention government officials indoctrinated with faith, even normal officials would impose restrictions on it. Of course, this could lead to contradictions and even conflicts, depending on personal tactics and local circumstances. The fact that there had been no troubles in Karolia gave Gu Heng much relief. The core reason was that the last war had just ended not long ago, Gu Heng had acquired immense prestige and military power, and he still held the title of war zone commander. Besides, Zhao Qinghong, the bishop, was not a particularly strong figure. Although he had a good grassroots base and was dissatisfied with the cancellation of privileges, he weighed the compensation that Gu Heng offered, such as the promise to support evangelism, and the alliance government would even provide special funding. He also considered the potential results of making a fuss, especially without the support of the sisterhood. Forget it, let's leave it at that. As for complaining to a higher level of the state religion organization, Zhao Qinghong actually did. But it was no use, he knew it himself. His complaint was essentially a plea, lamenting his own difficulties. The cardinal archbishop above consoled him for a while, and that was that. The higher state religion organization had no intention of standing up for this matter. The core point here was that Gu Heng had not touched the core interests that the state religion valued most, influence. The state religion could still continue to evangelize without restriction, and the alliance government even provided some conveniences. As long as the number of registered believers didn't decrease, that was enough. Indeed, due to a more effective and transparent management system, the number of registered believers might even surge. So what was there to make a big fuss about? As for the religion not meddling in politics or having economic privileges, what did that have to do with the higher state religion organization? The state religion organization had neither plans to control the Tianma star sector through influence, nor would it fight for the economic privileges of its subordinate sects. The money didn't go to them, and clearing out the corrupt was met with applause. After settling matters with the state religion, all of Karolia's affairs were on the right track, and the rest was left to time to ferment. Gu Heng needed to wait for Minjian City to step-by-step progress to the point where it could form an internal cycle in accordance with the planned steps. As for himself, he was finally able to relax. However, this so-called leisure was only relative. At his level, how could he possibly have truly leisure time? Not needing to focus all his time and energy on state affairs, he naturally had other matters to attend to. First, he visited the Storm God Kingdom. Jiwajia, the great unclean one's subspace essence, was still atop the high tower in the divine realm, suffering the storm's lashing and torment. Months had passed, and Jiwajia's subspace essence had been almost completely eradicated. So much so, that Gu Heng could no longer see the small unclean one brandishing its claws, only a thin yellow-green mist remained. In its place, the storm god kingdom was rife with thunder. Within the dense thunderclouds, a more substantial new life was being nurtured. In just a few months, the scale of the storm god kingdom had almost doubled. The dissolution and consumption of Jiwajia's subspace essence had increased the power of the storm god kingdom. With greater subspace authority, the forces the Storm God Kingdom could summon increased significantly. Gu Hang estimated that with the current strength of the Storm God Kingdom, if he faced another great demon like Ge Wajia daring to invade alone, he shouldn't need to rely on favorable timings or push the enemy out to the fringes of reality nor rely on real-world assault to destroy the enemy's body and soul. Now, relying solely on the power of the Storm God Kingdom, he should be able to defeat the enemy. Even if the great demon came with its thousands of demonic forces, the Storm God Kingdom now had the capacity to fight head-on. This was not only the result of the Storm God Kingdom gaining much greater power but also due to Gu Hang himself becoming stronger. After defeating Ge Wajia, he had amassed enough experience to level up. Although reaching LV9 required a terrifying 200,000 points of grace, with his many personal experiences, Gu Hang clearly understood that in this universe, military strength was very important, and so was having powerful top-tier fighters. Chapter 650. He decisively spent those graced points. After leveling up to LV9, even without the additions from subspace, his spiritual energy strength had already reached S grade under normal conditions. This was the uppermost level one could normally achieve within the Psychic Cultivators Association, nearly powerful enough for one person to constitute an army. The thunder he summoned would be more terrifying than a barrage from 10,000 cannons, capable of repeatedly bombarding an entire battlefield into rubble. His telekinesis could twist charging armored groups into twisted shapes. With the assistance of a full mage corps, he could amplify his power and affect areas over 100,000 kilometers away in the void of space, tearing apart the void shields of cruisers. Gu Hang also had a trump card. Once he tore open the veil of reality and let the power of the Storm God Kingdom seep into reality, his spiritual energy power would ascend another step, directly obtaining the strength of S and grade. Placed into subspace, lingering within the Storm God Kingdom, Gu Hang had already possessed strength equivalent to that of a great demon. However, this was as high as he could go. Gu Hang had previously thought that after reaching 9, it would be normal to have a 10. It wouldn't make sense for 9 to be the peak, right? Gu Hang had various events and characteristics boosting his abilities, allowing him to possess S-grade spiritual energy strength at the level of LV9. As for his subordinates who had been normally activated as heroes, in terms of spiritual energy, even if they reached LV9, they'd probably be at A and grade at most, or at best, a weak S grade. But setting aside those myth-like records, just within the existing members of the Imperial Psychic Association, there were so-called S and grade psychics. This was a level of power Gu Hang couldn't reach even with his special traits. He could only achieve such strength by cheating using subspace. Not to mention, within the ratings of the Psychic Cultivators Association, there was a level even higher than S grade, known as Alpha Class Psychics. Psychics of this level, to put it extravagantly, could destroy a star with a mere thought. Of course, this is under the premise that the star has no protection. Anyway, Gu Hang's current spiritual energy strength, although barely top tier, was obviously still a distance away from the ceiling. Yet, with the system, he had maxed out. This situation reminded Gu Hang of a dream he had previously, where the person in the dream said it was a pretty interesting little toy. Little toy, not fit for the big stage, is that what it means? Because it's just a little toy, so there's a ceiling? This explanation seemed rather logical, but Gu Hang was not satisfied. He had recently reviewed quite a lot of shared data from the Psychic Cultivators Association, even troubling Chairman Wang Yang of the Sector Psychic Association to make a special trip from Flying Wing Star to bring him data. Combining this information with his own situation, especially his careful perception of the feeling when using spiritual energy and analyzing himself in depth, he had roughly formed a conjecture. When psychics use spiritual energy, they are essentially not using their own power. They are holes in the real world, a conduit, with spiritual energy using the psychic's soul as an anchor to come into this world. Theoretically, a high-grade psychic would manifest spiritual energy strength even without any training, except that this strength would be uncontrollable, causing terrible destruction, or even become the beacon for subspace abominations to come into the real world, or even tear open a subspace rift. A controlled psychic, on the other hand, can use this power as per their innate talent. In this sense, the amount of power a psychic can wield is predestined, depending on whether their hole is large or small. Later training improves control over spiritual energy. Yet most people will never hit that upper limit. With controllable spiritual energy being utilized, the uncontrollable spiritual energy is deliberately suppressed to avoid loss of control, which is the core of a psychic's training. Up until now, the primary function of the system had been to provide Gu Hang with spirit and talent, enabling him to better utilize and command spiritual energy. Without the system, his lifelong abilities in the realm of spiritual energy would have probably just been at C grade at best, then suppressing the spiritual energy he couldn't control, never achieving manifestation. But now, the system had raised his ability to control spiritual energy to an unsurpassable level, allowing him to fully grasp the ultimate power of a psychic. The system's interface of heroes, that was all it could enhance, it could not expand Gu Heng's whole. Furthermore, reaching the level of an alpha-class psychic, according to the research definitions of the Psychic Cultivators Association, had surpassed the upper limit of spiritual energy strength that a human individual could control. Any being with this level of psychic talent lacked the conventional meaning of control, the hole could not be mended, and the surging waves of spiritual energy from subspace would consume those of this talent grade. As they aged, a psychic of this level would become unable to block the rampaging spiritual energy, warping into an existence that could endanger an entire planet, or cause an even wider calamity. The Psychic Cultivators Association's approach to alpha-class psychics was to capture and research them in specially made anti-psychic prisons if they are discovered early, until the prisons could no longer contain them, at which point they'd be executed. If they were hard to capture, then direct execution was the method of choice. Even if a very few alpha-class psychics could manage to control their power, according to the research of the Psychic Cultivators Association, this control was temporary and unsustainable, as the human brain would get fried, ultimately resulting in an inevitable distortion of the soul. Chapter 651. Unless, there are exceptions. Those very rare individuals must be studied separately, but generally speaking, it is believed that such cases are related to the Emperor, the greatest existence in history, far surpassing an alpha-class psychic in strength. Like the legendary archangels and sages, these two interstellar warriors known for their demigod-like spiritual energy prowess. Now the situation is clear. Under normal circumstances, Gu Heng's spiritual energy has indeed plateaued. He cannot ascend any further. However, he thought of another path. If it is believed that Grade S represents the highest level of spiritual energy that humanity can wield, and anything higher is beyond what one can grasp as a human, then I won't become. Oh, of course, I can't stop being human. But Gu Heng does have a unique advantage, which is his grasp of the subspace essence of the subspace inferior god. To break the limits of humanity and wield alpha-level spiritual energy, even to a greater extent, relying on loopholes alone won't cut it. One must possess the essence of subspace and become one of their own in subspace. If he is now in subspace, possessing the power to defeat the great demon head-on, then he has already achieved the strength of an alpha-class psychic. What he needs to do next is to assimilate the subspace essence as closely as possible, even embrace this essence, so that he gradually acquires this level of strength in the real world. But Gu Heng still has reservations. Over embracing the essence of the Storm God Kingdom's subspace, wouldn't that mean no longer being human? Currently, he is still a psychic, and even if a grand judge from the tribunal were to stand before him, he'd still be a legitimate imperial psychic. But if combined with the storm essence, then it wouldn't work. About this, Gu Heng also harbors doubts. Fortunately, this isn't a decision that needs to be made right away. His current LV9, similar to a grade S and level spiritual energy, is already sufficient. If there is a big issue, Gu Heng can exploit a loophole and temporarily obtain alpha level power, so there's nothing unsatisfactory. As for the future path to touch the ceiling, there's still plenty of time to explore. Gu Heng has many points of grace at his disposal. After the victory of that great battle, he directly received 1.3 million points, and at the time, he even felt like he could never spend all these points. Later on, he found out that this was an illusion. The loyalty training for 40,000 administrative officers cost 400,000 points, his own leveling up cost 200,000 points. Almost half were gone. But having spent so much, these 40,000 people can only be considered a stopgap solution at best. Administrative officers were still lacking. Furthermore, he had to reserve a large amount of grace points for military training. He intended to enforce military control in all the nest capitals of Karolia, clear out the bottom nest districts and lower nest districts, and need long-term fortification. The current 150 million planetary defense force troops were far from enough, and Gu Heng didn't even see the value in ordinary planetary defense forces. He aimed to eventually reform Karolia's entire military under the Salvation Army system. Talking about expanding the military, even the training for these 100 million existing troops would cost 1 million grace points. How could he afford that? If he truly wanted to expand to his ideal size of around 300 to 400 million troops, that would be even more unfeasible. Looking at it this way, there truly weren't enough grace points to go around. And the significant increase in monthly grace point income Gu Heng was expecting from Karolia after system recognition, also fell through. Karolia was indeed recognized by the system, which Gu Heng could now see on his panel. However, the inclusion of 40 billion people into the Union did not result in a growth of monthly income, but rather a decrease. Previously, Gu Heng had reached a scale of 7,000 monthly income. But the moment Karolia was acknowledged by the system, it plummeted to 4,000, back to the level from 4 years ago. Good grief, so Karolia was a burden, hey? Gu Heng complained inwardly. This situation was somewhat beyond his estimates. Originally, he did not expect Karolia to provide a particularly high grace point income immediately, not even with its 40 billion people. Gu Heng's worst-case scenario was merely a lower income, but he had not anticipated a deficit. Yet in his heart, Gu Heng wasn't the least bit panicked. At the time, he knew it was only temporary. Suddenly adding hundreds of billions of people with low living standards, low productivity and poor control was expected to cause such an issue. As the various real problems on Karolia were resolved, this situation would quickly improve. And indeed, it did. In the months since Karolia's system recognition, over 100 million people have been relocated to the Union twin stars. This even caught the attention of Lois, who was returning to the star domain government to assume her position as the Minister of Internal Affairs shortly. Massive population changes in a short period invariably lead to issues. She would question how Karolia could afford the taxes 6 years later if it continued exporting its population at this rate. Gu Heng also had doubts. With the rapid growth in the population of the Union twin stars achieved through migration, how would taxation be handled? They couldn't consider Karolia with its 40 billion people and then count the twin stars with the increased population. Wouldn't that be taxing me twice? After this communication, Ms. Lois in principle agreed that future Union taxes would be calculated as an entirety, amounting to an annual tax of 40.5 billion tax currency. Chapter 652. Karolia Battle Zone Transformation, a reduction of 4 billion. In the recent 6 years, only the tax currency for Hagian Star and Rage Owl Star needs to be paid annually. However, there will be follow-ups. The Empire recalculates the designated tax quota for each world every 10 years, and the next recalculation period is a year away. At that time, the administrative officials of the Star Sector government will conduct a detailed investigation of the situation on the 3 planets of the Alliance, and in the end, a tax amount will be calculated and reported to the Star Domain. According to past situations, the population of Karolia is too difficult to ascertain accurately, and I'm afraid it will still be calculated as 40 billion, the twin stars are easier. When the time comes, it is estimated that the count will be based on the actual number of people. Whether the population migrates or not, the Empire doesn't care, there's no precedent for that. If Gu Heng can manage Karolia well within the year, conduct a decent population census, and withstand the on-site verification of the Star Sector government and review by the Star Domain government, then wouldn't the matter be resolved? A clear population census means that internal population migration within the Alliance won't affect tax calculations unless the overall development coefficient of the Alliance is adjusted. Like Flying Wing Star, which also has to pay 4 billion tax currency annually, just like Karolia, but it only has a population of 8 billion. This highly developed garden world has a development coefficient of level 5, meaning a single person corresponds to 0.5 tax currency. It's simply astounding. But for now, it seems the Alliance should not be subject to an increase. It's uncertain after the next decade. Gu Heng still feels somewhat helpless about this result. Adjusting Karolia's governance within a year to the point where a thorough population census can be conducted, even if he is relatively optimistic, he's still somewhat unsure. If things don't go well, he might still suffer. Nevertheless, even so, one should not give up eating for fear of choking. The population migration must be persisted with unceasingly, even at a loss. In fact, it has already had an effect. Those who are relocated to Hagian Star and Rage Owl Star indeed have no debuffs and can be put to work immediately. On Rage Owl Star, Viking Valley region still has plenty of land that can be cultivated. South Green Valley region can also start with land clearing. The ever-prepared Green Valley Army Group has been ordered to advance southward and eradicate the mutated monsters within. Numerous jungles have been chopped down, not all, but in a planned way, and the land has been cultivated. According to estimates, just to develop all the farmland in the Green Valley region, at least 200 million laborers are needed. Not to mention that Wuxing City, the industrial heartland, continues to expand its production capacity, with a substantial demand for industrial workers. According to calculations by the Alliance government, it is extremely difficult for Rage Owl Star to return to its glory of over 100 years ago. Natural conditions also no longer support it. However, it has no problem accommodating 30 billion people. This is still the premise of not developing in the style of a nest capital world. In fact, Rage Owl Star can develop 1 or 2 industrial-type nest capitals, which would double the accommodable population. Hagian Star, with superior natural conditions but a large ocean area and a smaller land area, can also accommodate more than 30 billion people. If the mass migration is carried out with this goal in mind, Corollia's population would decrease by 15%-20% at once, and the survival pressure would also be greatly reduced. With a significant influx of population, Hagian Star and Rage Owl Star will undergo rapid development. At the same time, reforms in Corollia, especially in Minjian City, have begun to show results. By now, Gu Hang's monthly grant points income has returned to around 7,000. So far, 8 months have passed since the end of the Minjian City defense battle, and just from the monthly income, Gu Hang has received more than 30,000. Plus the earnings from some small-scale battles to suppress rebellions, Gu Hang now has a total of 750,000 grace points on hand. Most, of course, should be saved for subsequent preparations. He still needs to expand the army and train administrative officers. However, it wouldn't hurt to take a portion out for some technological draws. Going for a 10 times draw in the 10,000 bracket, let's try my hand at it. Chapter 653. Gu Hang now draws technology in the 10,000 yuan tier, which guarantees 100% output of items. And most likely, they're high-quality goods. After all, even epic technology has a 20% chance of being drawn. In his series of continuous draws, he indeed managed to obtain an epic-level technology. Spirit Engine. This is an engine technology that can directly utilize compressed energy crystal blocks. Entities like the Warhound class Titan simply aren't worthy of being equipped with a spirit engine. Such engines are generally used in large Titans and starships. But for some medium to large starships, such as destroyers and cruisers, utilizing large individual engines is not sufficient. They require corresponding design blueprints to create engine assemblies. With this technology, given the various other technologies he already possesses, Gu Hang now essentially has the capability to build large starships. But the reality is, the Alliance currently only has a small shipyard, which is still only capable of constructing smaller vessels. This is a bit awkward. However, among the elite-level technologies he obtained in this wave, there were also some excellent items that solved Gu Hang's problem. Shipyard Blueprint. This blueprint is a complete set of technologies, similar to the Star Harbor Technology Blueprint. Following the blueprint and using the accompanying black box, a variety of parts can be crafted to construct a shipyard of advanced standards. Also included in the elite technologies drawn this time was the construction technology for patrol ships. These are proper military vessels. Although they are one grade below escort ships, they can still play a significant role in naval combat, adopting a wolf pack tactic, and can be used for route protection and combating piracy. The Star Realm Tunnel is anything but peaceful. In addition, among the elite tier, there was a technology that made Gu Hang quite happy, Lion King Tank. Needless to say, its combat capability is obvious. Once it's possible to construct them, if an armored brigade could equip a couple of these tanks per regiment, their combat power would soar. Also worth mentioning is a piece of advanced technology, Transport Ship Flying Pig Model. In terms of technical grade, it's on par with the smaller vessels, but it's much larger than those, even much larger than regular military vessels such as patrol ships. Although it does not have combat capabilities and can't be effectively retrofitted for battle, if its arm it would be considered an armed merchant ship, yet its combat strength would also be lamentably weak. But for cargo and passenger transport, it's quite good. It can carry over 80,000 passengers in one trip, along with a substantial amount of cargo, providing for months of travel through the Star Realm. Inside, it can even include a small-scale recycling system and a synthetic starch system for emergency reserves. The Gu commercial firm also has a significant demand for this product. Once constructed, there will be no worry about selling it. Moreover, Gu Hang doesn't plan to sell it, as this vehicle is economically practical and reliable. Producing 100 of them, they could make 3 round trips from Corollia to Rage Owl Star in a month, or 1 round trip to Hagian Star, transporting 2 to 3 million people each time, which would greatly facilitate the relocation efforts. As for the rest that came out, 4 advanced and 1 basic technology, their significance was not great, with some capabilities already obtained by the Alliance through trade and through their self-developed technology improvements, so they're not worth mentioning. But after drawing from the 10,000 yuan tier, the prize pool didn't look as appealing as at the start. The probability of drawing epic technology dropped to 10%, and elite level was at 30%. Clicking his tongue, Gu Heng's hand shook, and another 20 draws went down. This time, his luck was still decent. An epic level technology came out first, with the probability down to even 5%, and miraculously, the last draw brought another. These 2 technologies were Destroyer Design Blueprint and Sky Burning Torpedo Technology. Destroyers, now those are considered sizable ships. The Tianma fleet can be counted as the second largest naval fleet in the Dragon Hawk sector, with 7 cruisers as its main force, but also has about 30 destroyers. The cost to build even the cheapest model is at least 1 billion, while more expensive models can cost tens of billions. The differences lie in areas like propulsion, firepower, divination, and protection, quite a complex array of factors. But in general, destroyers can be viewed as a watershed in naval fleet standards. In smaller naval conflicts, destroyers are trump cards and attention-grabbing powerhouses. Even in large-scale naval battles, destroyers can't be ignored. A genuine large vessel, if targeted by the fierce firepower of a destroyer, might not withstand the assault. If the void shield overloads, even one surprise hit could spell disaster. When the Alliance shipyard is able to construct destroyers, that will be its entrance into the big league. However, before achieving this step, there is still a lot to be done by the Alliance. The design blueprints and accompanying black box provide the capacity for ship construction. The Spirit engine, along with the appropriate jump engine, jump protection stance, jump identification technology, or a Chalcom technology, these all meet the prerequisites for shipbuilding. Yet, constructing a destroyer in the truest sense still presents difficulties. The technological level of the shipyard can overcome part of this challenge. After obtaining the shipyard blueprint, technical workers can be trained, but a destroyer needs weapons and defenses. Without them, it is just a shell. While the hull of a starship is also quite valuable since it is the base, after all, Gu Heng's intention is not to sell it once built. Chapter 654. Moreover, building the ship's hull and then sending it to others for processing would significantly reduce the profit. However, this problem was also resolved soon after. Among these 20 consecutive draws, Gu Heng also got 6 elite technologies, which included 2 M classification weapons, M classification heat hammer colossal cannon and M classification sky splitter missile. The firepower of M classification could certainly serve as the main gun of a destroyer. With these 2 items, the Alliance could even develop 2 types of destroyers, a missile destroyer that focuses on missiles, and a gunship that focuses on the colossal cannon. Both could play different tactical roles in naval battles. As for the many S classification secondary guns, whether it is the kinetic cannon or the energy cannon, or even the scalpel missile, the Alliance had corresponding technological reserves. Also, among these 20 draws was an advanced technology named energy shield generator. Although it was not a void shield, an energy shield for a destroyer was decent enough. Void shields were good, but equipping them would cause costs to soar. Besides the fact that the cost of void shields themselves was much higher, they also required more energy supply, which meant that more spirit infusion engine modules were necessary. And increasing the number of engine modules wasn't a simple addition, the design difficulty would skyrocket along with the costs. Looking at it this way, with this series of technologies acquired, plus the past technological reserves, the Alliance shipyard had a lot to look forward to. As for the second technology, Skyburn Torpedo, it was an even more terrifying thing. This was a planet slayer weapon. The manufactured products were as big as several hundred-story buildings tied together. At least a cruiser or larger starship would be required to launch it, or it could be placed on the ground and manually detonated. Its main function was to ignite a world's entire atmosphere post-explosion, forming a terror wave sweeping the global surface. Lighter materials from the air to water and surface would all burn up eventually due to a chain reaction, turning the whole world into a giant fireball within 1 or 2 weeks. Depending on the size of the planet, the burning could last from a few months to several years. It couldn't certainly destroy a planet, but it could destroy all life on it. Only life forms that were extremely resilient and that hid in very deep and almost hermetically sealed places, avoiding the celestial fire, might have a chance to survive for months or years. That was just a chance. The horrific burning would cause severe geological activity, and the subsurface structure would likely collapse easily. But even if one were to survive that, whether the underground environment could support the survivors for months to years was another question. And even if they truly survived, when the planet's surface was burned to nothing, what would be the prospects of life, and how would they sustain their lineage? This kind of extinction-level weapon might not guarantee the eradication of every living individual on the surface, but it was enough to wipe out species. For the very few survivors, life on a planet worth nothing after the burn was also meaningless. However, in conventional wars, it was rather useless. It was extremely expensive, its manufacturing cost coming close to that of a cruiser. Its penetration ability was very weak, very easy to intercept, a single defender or reflector hit could render it useless, and using it to attack enemy ships was pure fantasy. As an extinction order weapon, it was viable, but if one intended to occupy the planet, it was clear that this thing could not be used. Once used, the planet would also become useless. If it was an extinction-level war, the harsh launch conditions would also require complete orbital control of the planet by the launch party. Otherwise, if the enemy's anti-orbital firepower exploded it in the atmosphere, it would be moot. The most common scenario for its use was having full control of the orbit while the surface battles were unwinnable, and if there was no intention to keep the planet, then launching one would suffice to exterminate everything. A few months ago, Corollia almost took this route. If Gu Heng hadn't solved the problem and assessed it to be unsolvable, he would have submitted an application, found a big shot who could take the responsibility, settled the matter, and arranged for a skyburn torpedo to be sent. While the cult had not yet deployed anti-orbit cannons to cover the entire planet, they could have deployed the skyburn torpedo on the opposite side of the planet from Pheno City, and that would have been Corollia receiving the extinction order. Gu Heng thought it over. This technology was very sensitive, more than anything he had obtained in the past. Things like Night Mecha and Warhound Titan were already quite problematic. Rifles, tanks, armored vehicles, and warplanes, the sect of mechanics didn't care much about the diffusion of these technologies. From another perspective, this might also be a tacit agreement between the Empire and the sect of mechanics. However, when it came to Night Mecha and Titans, two of the sect of mechanics' most iconic products, the restriction was much more stringent. Although there had not been any wars reported over this matter, as far as one could see, except for the sect of mechanics' foundry worlds and a few places with especially tight relations with the sect, other places had not been seen making them. Not to mention manufacturing, there were hardly any non-sect of mechanics forces heard of that could operate such war machines except for Night Mecha, as many feudal worlds often bought them or directly became night worlds under the sect of mechanics' command. Chapter 655. Titans appeared on the battlefield, either due to the operations of the sect of mechanics' protection army or the Imperial Army's operations involving the sect of mechanics in many Star Realm Army Corps, within the Navy, and even under the command of planetary governors, members of the sect of mechanics could be found. For someone like Gu Heng, the situation was rather conspicuous. Compared to the Warhound Titan or Ranger Knight, the Skyburn torpedo might still be an even more eye-catching item. If Gu Heng was careful, he could keep his distance from the sect of mechanics. After all, within the entire Dragonhawk star domain, there was only one foundry world, which was located far away in the Yunluo sector, without closely linked communications to the Tianma sector here. Gu Heng could refrain from openly disclosing the sources of the Titan and Night Mecha, but he could hint at receiving support from a particular faction within the Mechanical Cult Guild, who exactly, he wouldn't specify. When it was finally necessary to reveal it, he would push Wu Jiarong to the forefront. Why can't I have a genius who can develop Titans on her own? Wu Jiarong's abilities had now reached the level of a dominant bishop. For her, as long as she met the standards, Gu Heng would promote her, not waiting for her to upgrade herself. Even so, Gu Heng was considering that once Wu Jiarong's abilities improved further, and his overall power was strong enough to withstand greater pressure, he would take the initiative and establish a new faction within the Mechanical Cult Guild with Wu Jiarong as the leader. But that was a matter for the future. At present, the main focus was to survive and deceive. To deceive as long as possible, that was the plan. Displaying the Skyburn torpedo, however, was seriously contrary to this goal. There was no need to use it now, couldn't dare sell it, production was difficult, and truly unnecessary. With the black box roughly taking 4 years to produce a finished product, let the black box continue its production. As long as he had it in his possession and could use it when necessary, that was enough. His thoughts returned to the advanced technology lottery. Aside from these items, 4 elite technologies were also unveiled. Orbital Defense System Design Blueprint, Transport Ship Whale Class, Kylan Fighter, Escort Ship Design Blueprint. All were quite reliable things. The orbital defense system goes without saying. This technology would allow Gu Heng's technicians to fully grasp how to set up reliable anti-aircraft defenses using various types of artillery. Accompanied by detection and targeting systems, it would better destroy any offensive targeting the planet. Wealthy worlds like Flying Wing Star, for instance, would have orbital defense systems covering the entire globe. Of course, this cost was very high, but at the very least, it was necessary to cover strategic points, such as the industrial heart of Wuxing City. The nest capitals of Karolia already had some capability for orbital anti-air defense, so they could afford to wait. Heijian Star actually had some as well. Rage Owl Star really started from scratch and needed to be prioritized. The transport ship Whale class was a transport ship one level higher than the Dolphin class. The escort ship design blueprint, likewise, needs no further explanation. With the acquisition of these two technologies, the production lines of the Alliance shipyard were further completed. When all these technologies could be applied, the entire production line of the Alliance shipyard would be very complete. Civilian ships ranging from the Voyager to the Dolphin to the Whale, military ships from the patrol ship to the escort ship to the destroyer. Not only was shipbuilding complete, but the entire series of production lines surrounding ship construction were also complete. From ship design to shipbuilding, from onboard firepower to shield generators, from starports to shipyards. Thinking of this, Gu Heng felt full of ambition. Why was Flying Wing Star wealthy? Despite having a development index of 5 and a population that paid 0.5 tax currency in imperial tax per capita, why was it still so affluent? Apart from the planet itself being developed, a huge part was the shipbuilding industry. Bearing a 4-year construction cycle, they could produce 1 cruiser and 8 destroyers, not including other small combat ships and civilian vessels, which was a substantial wealth, wasn't it? On his own, he not only supported the Tianma fleet but also managed a large number of exports and sales, and even used ships to pay the imperial tax directly. In the war against the Greenskins, where naval battles were an integral part, it was the fierce productive capacity of Flying Wing Star that was relied upon. Why do you think when there is trouble in the Tianma sector, a Star Domain envoy arrives immediately? If she managed to resolve the calamity in the Tianma sector, she would ascend directly to Minister of Internal Affairs, becoming the second most powerful person in the Star Domain. That was because Karolia and Flying Wing Star in the Tianma sector were just too important to lose. And in the future, Gu Heng was expecting Rage Owl Star to achieve a similar status. As for the last piece of technology, the Kylan fighter was essentially a version of the Wind Falcon with boosted firepower. Mainly, the firepower was much stronger. Moreover, within the technology set of the Kylan fighter, there were actually 2 sets. One was used for normal air combat within the atmosphere, and the other, through some modifications and accessories, could produce a shipboard version. The reason the Wind Falcon wasn't designed this way was mainly because the Falcon's firepower was like scratching an itch against a starship, making a shipboard version insignificant, but the Kylan's firepower could already threaten warships. The shipboard version of the Kylan needed to be modified in conjunction with the starship itself. These fighters could be rapidly deployed to the enemy ship's face by special launching devices, similar to boarding pods. They would then engage in continuous firepower attacks on the enemy. If one were bolder, they could slowly pass through the void shield or energy shield, entering the shield system's interior. They could cover the boarding pods, directly strike the ship, and if necessary, cram a few hundred people inside for a secondary airborne deployment. Chapter 656. This was yet another replenishment of the starship's combat weapons, and the land forces could benefit as well. Beyond that, there wasn't much to say about the rest of the advanced grade and basic grade technologies. Same as before, if they weren't already possessed, they were unimportant, and the better ones were just some upgrades to existing technologies. After drawing 100,000 yuan grade technologies in a row, Gu Heng still had 450,000 grace points left. After some thought, he restrained himself from the idea of continuing the lottery. Although gambling was addictive, Gu Heng needed to be more realistic. The hundreds of thousands of grace points he had were precious wealth left over from the last war. Seeing that such large-scale battles would no longer take place, relying on the monthly grace points and the rewards from security wars would only accumulate a few tens of thousands, maybe 100,000 a year. This meant that the few 100,000 grace points Gu Heng had were irreproducible. Spending them freely now would result in an ugly cry when he needed grace points later. For matters on Karolia, whether it's needing a large army, a large number of administrative staff, or something unforeseen happening, all required Gu Hang to have a certain reserve of grace points. Without grace points, Gu Hang felt especially insecure. Another reason was that drawing more technologies would not make much difference. From this lot of dozens of technologies, whether those Gu Hang found important or less important, the alliance needed time to digest them. Drawing too many would lead to indigestion. In reality, things were already quite difficult as they were. Gu Hang had ambitions for a full-chain shipyard, but in practice, even with complete technologies, it would still take time to finish the many constructions, and train qualified workers and technical experts. However, when Gu Hang was inspecting the building interface, he noticed there were new things. The Comprehensive Academy, Technical Academy, Loyal Air Academy, Civilian/Military Factories. These four categories of buildings now had higher grade versions. The changes to Loyal Air Academy and factories were not particularly significant, using the advanced versions just improved educational levels and quality, and the additional value in production efficiency of the factories simply meant an increase in numerical value. For the Comprehensive Academy and Technical Academy, beyond the numerical improvements, the biggest change was the addition of 2 training options. Under the Comprehensive Academy, a new training option named Qualified Professionals appeared, roughly designed to quickly bring students up to the standard of qualified graduates based on their majors. This level was still a grade below talents and far from the threshold for hero activation, but it was nonetheless a method to rapidly produce professional talents in large quantities. Inside the Alliance's Comprehensive Academy, there were administrative, management, economics, commerce, literature, and many other types of majors. The corresponding talent shortfall had always been substantial. Under the Technical Academy, a new training program named Junior Commissioner was introduced. This was the lowest grade title in the sect of mechanics, but actually, out of the students graduating normally from the 3-year program at the Technical Academy, only about 20% could reach this level and pass the Junior Commissioner exam organized by the Alliance. Now that direct training was possible, it was equivalent to mass-producing outstanding graduates, which was a good thing. The price for these 2 training options was 10 grace points per person, the same as for a political officer. It might seem cheap, but in reality, for the Alliance's incredibly large talent gap, the few 100,000 grace points Gu Hang had were like a drop in the bucket. However, just like when he trained 40,000 loyal officials in a single breath during the construction of Minjian City, it wasn't enough for a full-scale approach, but by targeting certain areas and providing special reinforcement, it could greatly accelerate development. It seems it was time to return to Rage Owl Star. Chapter 657. Since the Karolya incident erupted 8 months had passed, and Gu Hang had never returned to Rage Owl Star, let alone visited Heijian Star. As for the situations on these 2 worlds, he mostly learned about them through reports from government officials. Although Karolya had tremendous potential and was a target for focused development, his fundamental concerns still lay with Rage Owl Star. And he also needed to take back the several dozen black boxes that had come out of this round of technological lottery. The importance of the shipyard was also high in his mind, and he needed to go back and personally keep an eye on it. Now that Karolya's situation had generally stabilized and the reforms had entered the right track, and with so many issues accumulated, it was time for him to make a return trip. In Karolya he had bid on 10 academies, most of which were placed in Minjian City, and the remaining 3 were separately situated in 3 other nest capitals that had begun preliminary stages of reform. After completing this last task, he embarked on the starship back to Rage Owl Star. Wu Jiarong was numb. Despite knowing that if the governor specially sought her out to visit the secret research institute, it must be to show her something big. After the governor's landing and a few days of handling official affairs at the governor's mansion in Revival City, meeting with officials from various regions, and then preparing to inspect the Wuxing City Industrial Center and explicitly informing her of his visit to the institute, she had already mentally braced herself. However, after she accompanied the governor along with the head of the Industrial Center, Patel, for an inspection that lasted a day, the governor came to her secret research institute late at night. A spare underground space had already been cleared out, but after looking around, the governor remarked, "Not enough. What the hell is not enough? How many black boxes do you have? Even if there were 100, this space could accommodate them." Of course, she dared not voice these thoughts, only muttering to herself internally before painfully saying to the governor, "This is currently the largest warehouse we can put into use. Larger ones are still being excavated, and if it really won't do, we could only employ the few smaller warehouses next door and try to connect them." Gu Hang stroked his chin and went with Wu Jiarong to look at the other so-called unopened small warehouses. He was somewhat disappointed. They were not enough. However, he also knew that Wu Jiarong couldn't be blamed for not giving her all. Here, situated in the outskirts of Wuxing City, appeared to be a research institute on the surface, but the most crucial area was underground, where all the technological rewards of black boxes that Gu Heng had redeemed from the very beginning to now were placed. All these black boxes were in use, producing finished products and industrial lines, all working according to the union's demands. This also meant that the utilization rate of the entire space had to be particularly high. The black boxes couldn't simply be stacked up, although they could operate fully autonomously internally. Both the input and output required external design guidance and an excellent assembly line design. Now, the black boxes that Gu Heng planned to bring out weren't indeed as many as 100, but there still were about 50 or so out of the total 30 draws he previously made, removing less than 5 empty ones. The rest of the technology were mostly finished products and mother machine black boxes. But regardless, although the number wasn't that exaggerated, some individual black boxes were particularly large. Like the technology for building several starships. The finished product and mother machine, of course, didn't mean that inserting materials would instantly produce a complete ship. That was impossible. The main thing was to produce some modular key components according to design requirements if one really wanted full production. That was also possible, but for instance, producing armor steel plates with black boxes would be rather foolish, completely unnecessary. Later on, the black boxes should output key modular components, or the mother machines should produce production lines for these modular components. These would be completed on the ground and then transported into space. Within the space, in the starport's shipyard, according to the technical requirements, ship hulls would be built, and then these key components would be assembled into the ships in the shipyard. But no matter how, even if it's just modular production of core components, as long as they are used on starships, they can't be small. And even though the underground space of the Institute had already been made as large as possible, when producing components for spacefaring people, it was already getting close to reaching the ceiling, not to mention the much larger starship components. It was quite normal for Wu Jiarong not to have considered this beforehand. Moreover, as more and more black boxes were placed inside the Institute, with growing scales, this problem would become even more severe. And not to mention the issue of space for placement, such a large space requiring so much raw material daily and outputting so many products, secrecy work would also become increasingly difficult. It was time to consider other solutions. The first thought in Gu Heng's mind was to build a dedicated space city or a star fortress in space to house these unspeakable secrets. There were many advantages in space. There was no need to worry about accidental entry, defenses could be extremely stringent, space was definitely ample, and even transportation would become more convenient than on the ground as the number of Union starships increased over time. But he quickly dismissed this idea himself. It was too conspicuous. Conventional secrecy was manageable, and a star fortress could be designed to be difficult to infiltrate, but secrecy would simultaneously become incredibly difficult, especially when there were proper procedures demanding entry for inspection, and then things would become quite tricky. Chapter 658. Another point is that placing it in space is not safe. This unsafe refers to the fact that if it really suffers a space attack, the Alliance, especially under the circumstances that its naval force is not strong enough, would find it difficult to provide support. Having vetoed the idea of placing the new black box factory in space, Gu Heng also thought of an even more ideal location. Although there was a slight risk, it was indeed the best choice. Moreover, he had actually been preparing for this for a while. Gu Heng patted Wu Jiarong on the shoulder, who was looking distressed. No need to think further, relocate all the staff to the surface. As for what's down here, I can handle it myself. Wu Jiarong was somewhat astonished. But with her long experience, she had learned not to ask about things she shouldn't. Ultimately, she obediently nodded and then, following Mr. Gu's orders, began to move all personnel from the underground space, and all the black boxes were also temporarily shut down. Most of the people active within the Research Institute had undergone brain surgery and were servants. Their reaction to the orders was very bland. The very few researchers who had been absorbed into the Research Institute had gone through the strictest loyalty assessments and training. They would not reveal secrets and fully understood the importance of following orders. After everyone had left the underground space, Gu Heng could begin his work. His thoughts ascended to the subspace, to the storm god kingdom within it. Here, countless valor spirits saluted Gu Heng suspended in the air. After returning the salute, he headed to his destination. That was a factory established within the storm god kingdom. It covered a vast area, but currently, it was nothing more than an empty shell. A large number of valor spirits were working inside it, continuing to expand the factory. And this was the new location Gu Heng had prepared for his black box factory. His spiritual energy power burst forth rapidly from within his heart, creating a subspace rift right there in the factory, which also connected to the real world, the underground of the Alliance's secret research institute. Immediately afterward, everything in the underground space was swallowed up by this subspace rift. Gu Heng revealed a smile. This should do it. The black box factory that was swallowed into the Storm God Kingdom remained completely unchanged. It wasn't just the black boxes that were ingested, but also the ancillary facilities that Wu Jiarong had built around them over several years. Semi-automated equipment for input and output of materials was also intact. With the investment of human labor, it could be immediately put back into operation. And in terms of manpower, there was no longer a need to use servants. The valor spirits within the Storm God Kingdom would be even more useful than the servants. They were former Alliance warriors who had sacrificially fallen in battle, their loyalty was beyond question, their existence also completely relied on the power of Gu Heng. Of course, the raw materials needed by the black box factory had to be transported from the real world, the products manufactured also needed to be sent out. But this wasn't too much of a concern. Gu Heng had already thought of a plan. The power of the Storm God Kingdom, located in the underground space of the Real World Secret Research Institute, wasn't waning. Instead, along with the power of Gu Heng, it fused with this land even further. Gu Heng turned this area of the real world into an overlay of subspace and reality. Just like the situation with Karolia above Pheno City, but for Gu Heng to achieve this on Rage Owl Star was much easier than what Ge Wajia had to deal with. The Storm God Kingdom was originally born from this land, and on Rage Owl Star, the veil of reality was naturally thinner, all of which provided an objective basis for more conveniently bridging subspace and the real world. And more importantly, as an evil god, Gu Heng himself was in the real world. He was not only able to control the nature of subspace and wield the power of the Storm God Kingdom as he pleased, but as a human, he could also consistently exist in reality. Using himself as an anchor, connecting the two places becomes effortless. However, at this stage, it was not yet completely finished. The overlay of subspace and the real world was not a stable state. Left unchecked for a long time, it could either disappear or uncontrollably expand rapidly, neither of which met Gu Heng's requirements. He needed to use his own power to stabilize this place. For this, Gu Heng was busy for a whole half-day. Half a day later, Wu Jiarong got Gu Heng's permission and returned to the underground black box factory she had built with her own hands. She came full of expectation, convinced that whatever Mr. Gu did would be extraordinary. But when she first entered, at a glance, it seemed as if nothing had changed. The layout was nearly identical to when she had left. She was slightly disappointed, having thought that Mr. Gu had something. Something wasn't right. The space was off, it couldn't possibly be this vast. The underground space of the Secret Research Institute had initially only housed a few black boxes. As the demand grew, it expanded, developing multiple underground warehouses. However, even the largest one built later wasn't as immense as this. Almost all the black boxes had been gathered together. Upon looking closer, it still wasn't right, the number was off too. The black boxes not only hadn't decreased but had increased by a large number. Wu Jiarong couldn't help but look toward Mr. Gu. Gu Heng said with a smile, "We don't have to worry about space issues anymore, the space here is almost infinite." Wu Jiarong didn't ask how Mr. Gu managed to do it, she was simply in awe. She had realized this was not mere technology, but a kind of mighty power. Then, she saw many people made of blue light, appearing here. They were uniform and highly disciplined. The leader seemed to be wearing an Alliance Army uniform, sporting a colonel's rank on his chest. "Mr. Gu. The Valor Spirit Legion production team is all in place, awaiting instructions." Gu Heng returned the salute, then said, "Colonel Derek, this is Ms. Wu Jiarong, the head of the Alliance Secret Research Institute. From now on, she will be leading the production team. You'll need to work with her closely to ensure the smooth operation of the Alliance secret factory." Wu Jiarong hesitated, but encouraged by Mr. Gu's look, she stepped forward and shook hands with Colonel Derek. In a blink, a thought sparked in her mind. She seemed to have heard of Derek before. Wasn't he the first commander of the 31st Airborne Division of the Alliance Army? Didn't he sacrifice his life in the battle for the extreme North Industrial City during the unification war of the Rage Owl Star? How had he become a Valor Spirit? And the others, those valor spirits? Wu Jiarong's gaze turned to Gu Hang again, her expression one of sheer shock. Human warriors who die on the battlefield, returning to the Golden Throne, that had always been the mantra of the state religion. And even within the Mechanical Cult Guild, there was a somewhat similar saying, all things find their end in the god of all mechanics. The valor spirits who returned to the Golden Throne, standing by Mr. Gu's side? This. Completely dazed, Wu Jiarong walked forward and cautiously shook hands with Colonel Derek. A real sensation came from the handshake. Gu Hang said with a smile nearby, I believe you two will cooperate quite well in the future. After showing Wu Jiarong the newly renovated underground space, Gu Hang let Colonel Derek continue with his task. The entire factory had started to operate under the command of the valor spirits. The subsequent pattern was relatively simple. In the real world, a highly confidential material transport team would bring in raw materials and take away the finished products, distributing them to various locations in need. Servitors would take charge of delivering those raw materials to specified locations in the underground space and transporting the finished goods to the surface for the transport team. These specified locations were already in a subspace superposition state. But from this point on, servitors would no longer witness the black box factory in action. Subsequently, the valor spirits would handle these materials, placing them on semi-automated assembly lines into the black boxes, and then removing the black box products from the line to the designated spots, waiting for the servitors to carry them away. Gu Hang had resolved the issue of insufficient space in the black box factory and even took the secrecy to the max. Unauthorized personnel simply could not enter the working area of the black boxes. This was not just a matter of security clearance but also the proactive recognition of subspace forces. Anyone without permission, the moment they stepped in, would suffer divine retribution. Furthermore, due to the time-space distortion of the Storm God Kingdom, places in such a superposition state were not just in one location. Chapter 659. The space on the outskirts of Wuxing City that originally belonged to the Secret Research Institute was processed by Gu Hang into an overlapping state with the Storm God Kingdom, which was just the beginning. The more than 50 black boxes that Gu Hang managed to obtain through 30 consecutive draws had all been put into place. As the production capacity and raw material demand of the black box factory grew larger, its visibility became increasingly noticeable when concentrated in a single location. Since the space-time itself was distorted, there was no need to locate everything in just one place anyway. In the following period, Gu Hang and Wu Jiarong visited many locations across Rage Owl Star. Officially, it was another site in Wuxing City owned by the Alliance, in Xianja Province, in Extreme North Industrial City, and in Skaro Starport City, each with a new secret research institute under Wu Jiarong's jurisdiction. But in reality, these so-called research institutes were essentially just passages. All these locations were connected to a spot in subspace, the same spot that was the actual black box factory. This meant that any materials transported to any secret research institute could be delivered inside the black box factory in the Storm God Kingdom. The products manufactured there could also be moved to any institute at will. This would further alleviate confidentiality issues, avoiding anomalies in material consumption and product output that were characteristic when everything was centralized in one location, and distributing them would make it more clandestine. At the same time, it would also alleviate the difficulties of transportation. Wu Jiarong had nothing but praise for the governor's design. Then, she was given a new task by the governor, to oversee the construction of the Alliance shipyard. This conversation took place within the Alliance starport. Gu Hang and Wu Jiarong took the orbital subway and arrived at the starport. He strolled around the starport for a bit, conducting an inspection. The starport on Rage Owl Star had been under construction for 5 years, drawing in external investment that accelerated its growth rapidly. By now, its scale was no less than Mingyan City starport. Of course, there were also starports on Karolia, not just one. Among the 40 nest capitals, 15 had their own starports of various sizes. Without a starport, large-scale interstellar cargo exchanges were impossible. But just think about it, setting aside other factors, just considering the starport in Mingyan City on Karolia, corresponding to a population of 4 billion, even after a large amount of immigration, Rage Owl Star only had 150 million people, yet both starports were roughly the same size, which showed the effort put into constructing the starport on Rage Owl Star. It also indirectly indicated that the construction of the starports on Karolia was quite poor. Moreover, the difference between the starports of the two locations extended beyond just their scale. The construction of the starport on Rage Owl Star was based on a starport blueprint that Gu Hang had obtained earlier. The construction was assisted by external construction vessels. In terms of overall design rationality and the efficiency of handling goods and passengers, it was incomparable to Mingyan City starport of the same scale. Gu Hang was relatively satisfied with this, but he also gave his own instructions. First, the scale of the starport on Rage Owl Star must be further expanded and equipped with orbital defense equipment to transition into a star fortress. The entire planet should have a dual defense system stretching from the starport to the planet's surface. When in the future the naval buildup of the Alliance catches up, it should have a 3-layer defense system, Navy vessels star fortress planetary surface. Only with such measures could Rage Owl Star's defense be considered foolproof. Meanwhile, the starport, which was expanding in scale, was also part of Gu Hang's plan for Rage Owl Star's production capacity to keep growing rapidly and sustainably over the long term. Rage Owl Star was going to be a vital engine for the Alliance's forward development, where not only its security needs to be ensured but also the cargo throughput, which was the lifeblood. The massive shipyard that will be built in the future will also require a starport of a larger scale to accommodate it. Eventually, this place may form a space city. As for the current Alliance shipyard, it has already achieved a certain scale. Over the past few years, it has at least become capable of producing human travel spacecraft. Flights operated independently by the Alliance have already established routes between Hagian Star, Rage Owl Star, and Karolia. Although, due to the scale limitations of human travel, it was still not possible to conduct large-scale transport and was only suitable for official personnel and document transportation. But at the very least, a connection had been established between them. At Gu Hang's initial request, the foundation of the Alliance shipyard was meant to be large and robust. Now that there was a real need for expansion, the space reserved for extension from the past played a significant role and saved a lot of trouble. For a long time to come, Wu Jiarong would be continuously traveling between the planetary surface and the starport. The Alliance shipyard will be designed and constructed according to the new shipyard blueprint plans. Some key components might even be produced by related black boxes within the shipyard. As the shipyard expands and each dock is completed, it will mean that a model of ship can be put into production. The civilian vessels such as the Dolphin and Whale were relatively simple and had fixed models with little variation, they just needed to be built according to the design blueprints. However, for patrol ships, escort ships, and destroyers, the Alliance currently only possessed the initial blueprints. Wu Jiarong would need to study these materials, in conjunction with the black boxes, to accomplish a further step of specific model design. Chapter 660. Currently, 4 models are planned. The Blackfish class rapid patrol vessel is equipped with shield generators, S-grade laser cannons and kinetic cannons. Compared to standard patrol vessels, it uses a Spirit Infusion engine module, which typical patrol vessels are reluctant to install, enhancing agility and speed. This is to facilitate the use of wolf pack tactics by the patrol vessels. Although small, its defensive capability is limited by the patrol vessel's grade and isn't very substantial, it will explode if hit by cannons. However, the Blackfish class can rely on its speed and agility, making it easier to dodge locks, reduce the likelihood of being hit, and more easily disperse formation to surround and attack ships much larger than itself. In short, its design philosophy is for the small to overcome the large through agility. The Silver Helm class escort ship has stronger shield intensity and thicker armor, with the capability to withstand hits from M-grade firepower. It is equipped with rapid-fire kinetic cannons and laser cannons, with a focus on enhancing its interception capabilities. It's meant to stay in front of main fleet ships, acting as a shield. Its main goal is to intercept as much enemy firepower, landing pods, and space fighters as possible. Belonging to the same class of escort ships, the Silver Sword class high-speed torpedo vessel has simplified energy shields and armor compared to the Silver Helm. Its interception ability isn't great either. But, like the latter, it specializes in speed and agility, has an enhanced engine, and apart from the conventional S-grade weaponry, it comes equipped with S-grade scalpel missiles and manages to fit an M-grade Rift Axe torpedo missile system onto an escort ship. Torpedo missiles can bypass energy shields or void shields at their terminal deceleration phase, potentially causing direct damage to the ship's hull. The ship-launched torpedo missiles are powerful and are not part of conventional artillery. However, the issue is that they are easily intercepted at low speed and can be wasted, but if even one hits, and if the shield doesn't work and interception fails, the enemy ship will suffer greatly, especially since the Rift Axe itself is an M-grade weapon. It's not just ships of the same grade, even cruisers 2 grades higher would be seriously damaged if they took a direct hit from a rift axe. This too follows the principle of the small overcoming the large. The Silver Sword class is relatively small and inexpensive, so betting on scoring a hit could result in a significant payoff. The Berserker Shark class combat destroyer is a conventional gunship without any unnecessary frills, centered around the hammer colossal cannon, emphasizing a balance between defense and firepower. The estimated cost of a Blackfish class rapid patrol vessel is 32 million tax currency apiece. The cost for the Silver Helm class reaches 300 million 20 million tax currency. The price of the Silver Sword class torpedo escort ship is a bit cheaper, at 240 million for one. The construction cost for a Berserker Shark class combat destroyer is 1.7 billion tax currency per ship. After the designs for these 4 types of ships were completed, Gu Heng contacted his mother and, through Miss Wang Qi, reached out to his future father-in-law, the retired Naval General Fufana, to evaluate these 4 classes of ships. After listening carefully to Wu Jiarong's introduction, the old general remained silent for quite some time, as if struck by something. After a while, the old general finally spoke, "Young man, don't set your sights too high." Gu Heng was a bit puzzled after being criticized by his future father-in-law. What's so overly ambitious about this? The old general had spent his lifetime on the battlefield, commanding countless ships and fighting many sea battles of varying scales. Could it be because the Alliance's few ships prompted such a remark? That can't be it, right? And I'm not being overly ambitious. These ships were designed from blueprints that Wu Jiarong obtained through a technology raffle. The Alliance's shipyard has already started building docks for these models. Once the docks are completed, all these ships can be properly produced. How is that being overly ambitious? Furthermore, the so-called construction costs Gu Heng mentioned were actually on the high side and not the actual production costs. After all, many components were produced by the black box or manufactured on production lines pulled from the black box. The actual costs aren't that high. Estimates suggest that the real cost for the Alliance to produce these items varies from 1/10 to half of the ship's quoted price. The difference mainly depends on the proportion of black box production in shipbuilding. The higher the proportion, the lower the cost. This construction cost is merely an estimated price that Wu Jiarong calculated based on the Imperial Navy's ordering prices from various shipyards. But then, General Fufana went on to tell Gu Heng about the situation and prices of the ships that the Tianma fleet ordered from the Flying Wing Star shipyard. Involving specific parameters and design specifications, naturally, it wouldn't be appropriate to discuss in detail. However, after hearing it all, Gu Heng roughly understood why General Fufana had spoken as he did. Take the rampaging Shark class battle destroyers, for instance. The models produced by Flying Wing Star shipyard ranged from the cheapest at 1.2 billion apiece to the most expensive at 2.2 billion, yet none of them technically matched the rampaging Shark. Gu Heng thought that the rampaging Shark's design was unremarkable, its ship robust and its cannons powerful, but with this level of protection and firepower, it was already considered ferocious among destroyers. And you're saying just 1.7 billion? The Silver Helm and Silver Sword followed the same logic. An escort ship from Flying Wing Star shipyard was generally priced around 300 million, but even the standard escort ships, when compared to Silver Sword, had nearly identical parameters, similar protection levels, and normal firepower. Yet your Silver Sword somehow squeezed in an extra rift axe and had high-speed characteristics, all while being 60 million cheaper. Then who would go to Flying Wing Star to buy ships? General Fufana did not believe the prices and performance parameters Gu Heng had mentioned. He thought Gu Heng was talking nonsense. The old man's earnest words echoed in Gu Heng's ears. It's good that Rage Owl Star has begun building spacecrafts, it proves that your work is bearing fruit. I also believe that Rage Owl Star has the potential to grow, to build good ships, big ships. But everything must develop according to objective conditions. You need to progress step by step, cultivate steadily, and not dabble in flashy and disorderly things, doing so might cause you to take a hard fall. And that so-called ship designer of yours is either deceiving you or lacks capability and is talking nonsense. Execute her, don't trust her. I'll take the lesson. I'll get rid of that designer right away, how dare she deceive me. During the call, Gu Heng nodded repeatedly, indicating he completely understood his father-in-law's kind intentions. After ending the communication, Gu Heng let out a long sigh of relief. Wu Jiarong, who had been listening in, was already pale. As soon as the communication was disconnected, she immediately said, "Governor. I didn't That's enough, no need to say more. Gu Hang's face was alight with an excited smile. Now, immediately adjust the construction cost of all ships by 30% upwards. Gu Hang said earnestly, you're too honest for your own good. Okay. And how much longer before our shipyard can get up and running? Wu Jiarong steadied herself and said, according to our plan, the first phase of the project will be completed in 1 year, at which point the Silver Helm class, Silver Sword class, and Blackfish class ships can begin production. The second phase will take 4 years to complete, and by then, all 4 types of ships we currently have can be produced. The third phase will take 6 years, and only then can we achieve the goal you've set, a 2-year shipbuilding cycle, producing 1 destroyer, 3 escort ships, and 10 patrol ships. Our first destroyer will not be in service until at least 8 years from now. Gu Hang let out a long sigh. They say a decade for land forces and a century for naval forces. It's the same with the Star Sea. At this rate, even with unlimited resources, the Alliance wouldn't truly have its own naval fleet until 8 years later, and it would still be a small fleet with just 1 destroyer. Of course, during that time, there should be more than just 3 escort ships and 10 patrol ships, and after the third phase is completed, the Alliance's shipyard won't stop construction, entering into a complete shipbuilding cycle, and the speed at which ships are produced will become increasingly faster. If Gu Hang really had 100 years, he might indeed have a very powerful fleet by then. But 100 years. Chapter 661. The ultra-high profits and value of the shipbuilding industry filled Gu Hang with great ambition. According to the construction period mentioned by Wu Jiarong, in 6 years, the total value of the ships launched by the Alliance shipyard every 2 years would exceed 3 billion tax currency. Although it was still far from reaching the scale of Flying Wing Star, which launched ships worth over 20 billion every 4 years, one must consider that they had been developing for hundreds of years, while the Alliance had been established for only how long? If this pace of development continued, the Alliance shipyard would only get bigger, and in about a decade, it might reach the level of Flying Wing Star and complete its centuries of development. However, despite the speed being extremely fast, so fast that even old sailors like Fufana would think it a pipe dream, Gu Hang still felt an urgency that time was not on his side. He would still need a long time before he could have ships that traversed the Star Sea. But the good news was that Gu Hang was still young and had plenty of time to wait. If we were to talk about lifespan, not to mention the life-extending surgery he could definitely afford, just his spiritual energy power and his grasp on the essence of subspace would lead him to estimate that his life would not be short. Without life-extending surgery, living a few hundred years wouldn't be a big problem. While he wouldn't be immortal, it was still quite remarkable. Not to mention, if he really reached the limit of his lifespan, Gu Hang had one last trick up his sleeve. Humans have limits, so why remain human? By embracing the essence of subspace, Gu Hang could achieve immortality immediately. Of course, that step was still far off. Gu Hang was merely using this thought to remind himself not to rush, for time was on his side. Thinking in this way, his state of mind gradually became more tranquil. For the next few months, Gu Hang was basically shuttling between Rage Owl Star, Hagian Star, and Corollia. He would listen to political reports from these planets, inspect some areas in person, and give some directives. At this level, frankly speaking, Gu Hang could no longer manage an alliance of such scale on his own. Relying on the government and his officials was a necessity. Gu Hang's work had to focus even more on managing people. Essentially, it was about ensuring his will was being implemented by the officials. If it was, then reward them; if not, critique and demote. Malefactors who intentionally opposed him and the corrupt were sent to court. Gu Hang had one particularly significant advantage over most rulers in this world: he understood the human heart. He truly understood. After all, he had the talent for thought-reading spiritual energy. Of course, he couldn't possibly use his mental abilities to probe the minds of every subordinate. In fact, he rarely did so. On one hand, doing so wasn't quite right. He didn't want to become a sorcerer tyrant who exploited and manipulated minds to rule his lands, as in doing so, he would not hear the voices of others. The wisdom of one person is far less than that of a group, provided that the group is moving in the right direction. On the other hand, it wasn't feasible. He could probe the thoughts of an individual, but he could not possibly take the time to clearly understand and then control the minds of each of his officials. If he really did it that way, he wouldn't have time for anything else in his life. However, not actively probing or changing thoughts didn't mean that spiritual energy was ineffective. In fact, even if Gu Hang did nothing, when someone stood before him and conversed with him, any significant change in thought would produce clear mental waves that were fully exposed before his eyes. The smiles and tension of those officials during their reports, whether they had confidence, self-doubt, guilt, or secret intentions. Gu Heng could see them all very clearly. Truthfully, Gu Heng did not particularly care about the trivial thoughts of his officials. He didn't have any mental obsession with cleanliness, and he understood better than anyone that all people, even those he trusted the most like Ozania, Lambert, and Yan Fangxiu, had their own thoughts. They might not fully understand Gu Heng's thinking, might have personal desires. That was all too normal. Or rather, that was the true nature of humanity. Even Gu Heng himself, at certain moments, why wouldn't he have the desire to slack off or take a rest for a while? As long as the overall direction was positive, that was enough. A bit of personal desire, bias, confusion, laxity, and resentment. Moderate amounts were acceptable, and Gu Heng would simply laugh them off. Of course, for the exceptionally ridiculous cases, all he needed to do was to let the Anti-Corruption Bureau investigate, and Gu Heng didn't mind using such methods to root out the corrupt and the negligent. Half a year passed by in this manner. At this moment, Gu Heng, who was on Rage Owl Star, witnessed the commissioning of the Alliance's first genuine new ship at the Alliance shipyard. It was a Flying Dolphin. Although it was just a transport ship, and although most of its core components came from the black box, and although the dock that built the Flying Dolphin had its foundation laid out beforehand. Regardless, this was the Alliance's first genuine ship. Those small crafts by Travel Ingman didn't count. Its value was clearly stipulated in the imperial tax, 20 million tax currency. Currently, the Alliance shipyard could build one Flying Dolphin every 6 months. And now, the 150 million people of Rage Owl Star paid only 15 million in imperial tax annually. The revenue from just one Flying Dolphin built every 6 months was more than enough to cover the tax. Even more so considering that Gu Heng's next imperial tax didn't even need to be paid. Not to mention the tax-exempt Karolia, the current fixed imperial tax for the Alliance was still 50 million tax currency per year, payable biennially for a total of only 100 million. However, on the Karolia battlefield, Gu Heng had already paid a great deal. First was the replenishment and expansion of the Rage Bear Legion's forces and the consumption of various types of supplies, ammunition, and provisions. Over the past 2 years, the Alliance has spent a total of 30 million. Originally, the majority of the Rage Bear Legion's personnel were replenished from Karolia, but now that Karolia belonged to Gu Heng and was tax-exempt, this part also had to be paid for by the Military Affairs Department. But the Military Affairs Department actually hadn't paid a penny, it was all done on credit, which could be used to offset taxes in the next tax season. This was supported by documents from the Imperial Military Department. Meanwhile, the Dragonhawk Legion received a replenishment of more than 3 million Karolia personnel, of which over 1 million were incorporated as a fully staffed army group. Furthermore, post-war, the armaments, ammunition consumption, and logistical supplies for the 3rd Group Army of the Dragonhawk Legion were all supplied by the Alliance, cutting off any ties with Fatches regardless of whether Fatches or the Dragonhawk Legion were willing participants. The command came from the Empire. In the last few months, the Alliance spent more than 80 million for this. Just these 2 legions together amount to 110 million in tax currency. When tax season arrives, the Empire still owes me over 10 million. And in the future, even if the fighting isn't as intense, the annual maintenance costs for the Dragonhawk and Rage Bear Legions will be about 80 million tax currency. There's no need to worry about imperial tax at all. At least, there's no need to worry for these few tax-exempt years in Karolia. As for the blimp right now, Gu Heng sold it to the Gu commercial firm at a bargain price. This was to appease the Gu commercial firm. For a long time, the Gu commercial firm had done a lot of unpaid work for Gu Heng. Initially, during the Karolia War, the Military Affairs Department was paying to help transport materials and evacuate personnel, which were considered orders that the Empire gave to the Gu commercial firm. But after the war ended, as the Alliance itself still lacked the capability for large-scale transportation in the Star Realm, the Gu commercial firm dedicated an entire merchant fleet, practically foregoing all other orders, to exclusively transport for the Alliance at extremely low prices. Merchants would be dissatisfied with this. Gu Heng is the family head, and his mother is the actual helmswoman. This is true. But the Gu commercial firm isn't their private property, it is a legitimate member of the Empire Commerce Guild, subject to performance pressures. Furthermore, the nature of its franchise membership remains strong to this day. The merchant fleet serving the Alliance, with its various transportation orders at low prices, is bearable, considering these are short hauls, but being unable to accept other high-profit orders is causing quite a bit of discontent. Miss Wang Qi might be willing to support her son without earning money, but she can't expect the same from everyone below her. The blimp is a good means of payment. For a merchant ship fleet, the most important wealth is the vessels. This blimp, sold at a bargain price of 10 million to the Gu commercial firm, is enough to suppress a lot of dissatisfaction. With one more ship, there will be one more captain, many more positions open, and some people can get promoted and receive raises. With a bit more profit, the whole merchant fleet can earn somewhat more. The main point is the significant savings. For Gu Hang as well, it's not a loss. Firstly, even with a selling price of 10 million, it might seem like a half-price sale, but the Alliance shipyard still makes a considerable profit. Of course, cost can't be calculated this way, since black box production doesn't cost Gu Hang anything, but it's still wealth. But most importantly, the blimp, upon delivery to the fleet working for the Alliance, is in the end still working for the Alliance, right? Shifting from the left hand to the right, the fleet is appeased, shipbuilding profits are earned, and the fleet's transport capacity increases. Multiple wins. After meeting with the person in charge of the merchant fleet, his cousin Wang Jiarong, for a meal, Gu Hang received a message. There were visitors. It was a group from the Star Domain government, which included representatives from the Star Domain government, the Military Affairs Department, and the Star Realm Army. The latter two even had two sets of representatives, from both the Dragonhawk Star Domain and the Eastern Cosmos Domain. The arrival of the Star Domain personnel was expected, as the current Minister of Internal Affairs, Lois, could be considered to have a good relationship with Gu Hang. But why was a team from the Space Domain government also present? What were they here for? Gu Hang didn't personally receive them, their status wasn't high enough, so the diplomatic department handled it. But soon enough, an official from the diplomatic department came to report, requesting the governor's appearance. This group had come to bestow an honor upon Gu Hang. Chapter 662. The so-called award ceremony was to commend Gu Hang for his outstanding performance as the commander in the Karolia battle. The atmosphere of the award ceremony was very formal, but it wasn't made too complex or grandiose. Gu Hang, dressed in his military uniform, received the documents from the representative of the Star Realm Army and pinned the medal to his chest himself, and with that, the ceremony was concluded. It was a bit irregular for one to award oneself a medal, but that's how it was done on this occasion. The representatives from the Star Domain and Cosmos Domain did not include any high-ranking officials. The Star Realm Army representative was just a civilian colonel, which made the awarding even stranger. So Gu Hang decided to do it himself. After exchanging a few pleasantries with the guests, they rested for a few days on Rage Owl Star under the hospitality of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs before embarking on their return journey. And Gu Hang thus became a major general in the Star Realm Army and was awarded the Empire's Glorious Medal. As the second tier of the Empire's 5 grades of medals, though only one level higher than the Warrior's Medal, it's actually a great honor. In fact, as long as it's an Empire medal, regardless of the level, it's of very high value. This is not the same as some of the wild chicken medals handed out by some planets and other interstellar organizations. There are only 5 medals that are legitimately recognized across all domains of the Empire. Even the lowest level, the Warrior's Medal, if awarded to an interstellar warrior, would be worn on the shoulder and chest armor as a mark of honor. However, if we are talking about actual value, there is none. Although there are instances where great contributions are awarded with medals and then rewarded with a star system or someone attains a very high political status, these are not benefits that come with the medal itself, but rather the intrinsic value of the achievements. The medal is purely a symbol of honor. Gu Hang couldn't help but make a snide remark, the Alliance's medals even come with money. Medals like the Rejuvenation Medal, Wind Extinguishing Medal, and Third-Class Combat Merit Award all come with a lifetime stipend, unless one commits an offense later and is stripped of the medal, then it's another matter. Nevertheless, Gu Hang was still delighted to keep his glorious medal. Wearing it on his chest when going out would still look quite prestigious. Moreover, Gu Hang's military rank had also been promoted. The movement caused by the Apostle of War Galaraldo had resulted in Gu Hang becoming the commander of the Rage Bear Legion with the rank of Brigadier General. At that time, his rank was somewhat nominal. A Brigadier General in the Star Realm Army, who wasn't in command of an army group. An army group's size is at least 1 million people. When the Rage Bear Legion was first established, it had only about 100,000 people, which was the size of 2 or 3 masters, and not even enough for the rank of Brigadier General. Now the Rage Bear Legion is a proper force of over 1 million people, and the rank of Brigadier General as Legion Commander is well deserved. But Gu Heng's status was more than that. Although the Karolia battle zone was a temporary setup, as the commander, at the height of his power, Gu Heng nominally commanded nearly half of the Tianma fleet, an entire army group of the Dragonhawk Legion, in addition to the local Planetary Defense Force, and yet he was still only a brigadier general. That was a bit too low under him. Hans, who was to obey him, was already a major general. Therefore, Gu Heng's rank was promoted to major general, a rank within the Star Realm army hierarchy. Gu Heng continued to complain, "The battle is damn over, and now they think my rank isn't suitable." The reaction speed of the Empire. But regardless, a post-facto promotion is still a promotion. In the future, when Gu Heng goes out, or when someone comes to Rage Owl Star, having the rank of Major General in the Star Realm Army along with the Empire's glorious medal, these two things together will indeed make an impressive display. However, Gu Heng was still pondering another situation: did the Empire take the initiative to arrange all this for him? He was somewhat skeptical. Given the value of these things and understanding the ecology of the Empire's political scene, the idea of rewarding achievement is just talk. Without taking initiative, without striving, and without backing, it's questionable whether the credit was truly his own. While Gu Heng's achievements were undeniable, expecting the Empire to proactively reward him, and generously at that, seemed unlikely. But speaking of backing, Gu Heng did think of two people. One was Nell Lavis. But he quickly dismissed this option. Lavis held significant power, but the position was not high enough. Although able to secure some tangible benefits for Gu Heng, obtaining the rank of Major General and the Empire medal probably wouldn't have been within Lavis's capabilities. The position of Minister of Internal Affairs of the Star Domain didn't quite fit with the awards Gu Heng had received. However, he seemed to have another backer. Galaraldo. After some thought, Gu Heng used the Star Language Tower on Rage Owl Star to make a very complicated interstellar call, directed toward Wuji Star in the Eastern Cosmos Domain's capital. His Star Language Tower could, at most, reach Flying Wing Star, already spanning 2 star systems and traversing 2 star realm tunnels. To contact Yunluo Star, where the Star Domain government resides, one would need to transfer from the Star Language Tower system on Flying Wing Star. And to get in touch with Wuji Star, the capital planet of the Eastern Cosmos Domain, it would require another transfer from Yunluo Star. Just using the Star Language Tower to search for a spiritual energy channel, then applying for permission, getting approval, transferring and searching again, applying and getting approval, the entire process was cumbersome. Especially when searching for a spiritual energy channel, the more transfers and the further the distance, the more complex the spiritual energy environments become, making the search more difficult, and posing a larger challenge for the work of the Star Speaker. Chapter 663. The original Star Speaker from Rage Owl Star couldn't do it. Even if you matched him with dozens of psychics from the Storm Mage Corps and maximized the spiritual energy, he still couldn't make multiple jumps to the cosmic domain capital. For long-distance star language communication, in addition to the strength of spiritual energy, a stronger ability to search for signals is equally important. The current Star Speaker at Rage Owl Star was good for nothing. Even if you threw this guy into the Union Storm Mage Academy for further education, it would be no use, he had no potential left. This guy was sent by Gu Heng's mother. In fact, the Star Language Tower was also a gift from his mother, with the Star Speaker dispatched together. Initially, they thought he was a high-tech talent, but later they found out this guy was just so-so, lacking both talent and ambition, only thinking of scraping by until death. But that's not really a problem, Gu Heng was very tolerant. Whatever you can do is as far as you can go, just do your normal work. Gu Heng would not make any further demands regarding capability issues. However, for star language communication, Gu Heng did have practical needs. As the Alliance's operations expanded more and more, the need for external communication would definitely increase. And, communication with fixed stars was already the simplest. More difficult was communication with fleets on long voyages. Now trying to make a call to Wuji Star was so troublesome, let alone getting in touch with a war fleet that was already in a remote star sector, constantly moving, and might sometimes have to enter a silent state. For example, the Tianma fleet to which Gu Heng's fiancée Yelizaya belonged, wasn't that even more unreachable? Indeed, that was the case. This area still needed to be strengthened. On one hand there was the need for improving the quality of star speakers, on the other hand, the technical level of the star language towers. Both complemented each other. A badass star speaker could connect straight to Holy Terra with crappy equipment. A crappy star speaker matched with a good enough star language tower could at least contact a place outside of the cosmos domain. While thinking about which direction the alliance needed to further strengthen development, Gu Hang's Sonic perception followed the signal of the star language tower, connected to the relay station at Flying Wing Star, then connected to Yunluo Star, and continued searching for Wuji Star. There was no helping it. If his subordinates were not up to par, then Gu Hang had to step in himself. He was not like the perpetual duty star speaker on Rage Owl Star. He was a bona fide grade S psychic, with a spiritual energy that was not of the same level. Although he had a disadvantage of not having undergone professional star speaker training, it was not too late to learn on the go. He had more than enough capital to attempt it. Then, the process of making this phone call wasted a whole day of his time. Connecting to Wuji Star was okay, taking only 2 hours, but after the call, Gu Hang received news that Galleraldo was no longer on Wuji Star. This did not match the last update Gu Hang had received. Galleraldo should have taken a fast ship and headed to the capital of the Empire, the homeworld of humanity, Holy Terra. He had left Wuji Star about a year and a half ago. Based on the speed of the ship he took, Galleraldo should have already arrived at Holy Terra by now. So, Gu Hang called Holy Terra. That was quite far, causing Gu Hang to spend an entire day on the call. After going through this ordeal, Gu Hang's proficiency in operating star language communication increased significantly. The next time he called Wuji Star, it should only take an hour to handle. Getting through to Holy Terra would also take at most 7 or 8 hours. Of course, even then it's still not really acceptable. How could Gu Hang have so much time to spend on making phone calls? In the future, unless there were better star speaker, a better star language tower, making it unnecessary for Gu Hang to personally act as the operator, he certainly wouldn't make any super long-distance interstellar calls for anything but extremely important matters. In fact, he was already regretting this call. He felt like there really wasn't anything particularly necessary to say to Galleraldo. It was only that he had already invested so much time halfway through, the sunken cost was too high, so he gritted his teeth and persisted, seeing it as a form of self-improvement. However, once the call got through, Gu Hang felt that the information he obtained from it was indeed very valuable. "I was still wondering how much longer it would take for your call to come through," said the frivolous voice of Galleraldo from the other side, carrying a fondness not heard for a long time. "The honorees only got to Rage Owl Star. After I met them, I immediately wanted to communicate with you, but, this remote place, please understand, it's really difficult to make contact with Holy Terra." I understand. But you moved quickly. Hello? Hello? Oh, can you hear me now, this damn call quality? Galleraldo cursed after complaining, then his tone lightened up again. "I called over a few star speakers specially to reinforce our communication channel, should be no problem now. From the way you speak, it seems you are also highly respected at Holy Terra." "Of course, who am I? I am Bakoya Galleraldo. Apostle of War. Don't call me Apostle of War anymore, I'm not that now." When Galleraldo said this, his mood dropped for a moment, but was quickly replaced by a new, vibrant emotion. "Now, please refer to me as Deputy Minister of the Imperial Military Department." Then, Galleraldo added, "Unless something unexpected happens, within half a year, I'll be promoted to Assistant Minister of the Military Affairs Department." Gu Hang's exclamation was genuine. The surprise Galleraldo brought to Gu Hang was even more significant than he had imagined. The military department mentioned by the former Apostle of War had the prefix of the Empire and was not followed by any other suffix. This meant that he was referring to the Central Military Department of the Empire. And what is the grade of Deputy Minister? The head of the central government of the Empire is the Prime Minister, and the Minister of the Military Affairs Department is one of the most important government positions under the Prime Minister. At times, as in the current era, the Minister could be one of the 13 members of the Human Supreme Council. Within the Military Affairs Department, below the Minister are the Deputy Minister and the Assistant Ministers, followed by the Deputy Ministers. In the Military Department, counting the Minister, there might be just 6 to 7 people above Galleraldo. If he really gets promoted to Assistant Minister within half a year, as he said, he almost counts as a top 5 figure in the department, and in extreme cases, he could even be considered the third in command. So, does that mean Gu Hang's good friend, Galleraldo, has become a proper high official of the Empire? Not someone who operates brutally by solely relying on the authority of the Sun Lord without any actual official capacity, those so-called apostles of war, but a legitimate high official of the empire. How did this guy manage to do it? Gu Heng felt deeply surprised. Amid his pride, Gallardo roughly shared his recent experiences with Gu Heng. Wait, your place. Gallardo understood immediately. Don't worry, of course, I'll be cautious to ensure our conversation is not tapped. He continued, let me think, where was I? Initially, after Gallardo was rescued from subspace by Gu Heng, he realized something had happened to the Sun Lord as soon as he heard the Sun Lord's delegation that came to save him hurried back halfway. He fled from the Tianma Star sector at the first chance he got. No matter how important the Tianma Star sector seemed, it was still a remote area of the Empire. He had to act quickly while he still had time. No matter how the Sun Lord died, Gallardo, being a confidant, was very clear that no one could continue to sustain the solar expedition after the Sun Lord. The vast solar expedition army, which nearly gathered the elite of the entire empire, would also disintegrate. He had to find a way out for himself, or someone like him, without military power, who made money for the Sun Lord, who offended countless high officials in the empire, would surely be quickly purged in the first wave. Chapter 664. Gallardo had a very clear understanding of his own situation at the outset. If he did nothing, he was as good as dead. He was a war apostle of the Sun Lord, the closest confidant of that great figure who had almost single-handedly wielded the Empire's supreme power for decades. When necessary, the Sun Lord even liked to exercise supreme authority directly through his war apostles. This was a very normal choice. In his view, the governmental system of the Empire was too cumbersome and inefficient. With his unmatched prestige, he would directly deploy war apostles, either as the chief administrative officer of a vast star domain, as a tax officer to gather war materials, this was the role of Gallardo, or directly appoint a war apostle as the person in charge of a certain war zone, consolidating forces like the Star Realm Army, the Navy, and even the Interstellar Warriors, the state religion's nuns, the Tribunal, and the sect of mechanics. This greatly increased efficiency, integrating the Empire's complex and cumbersome forces, but undoubtedly destroyed the Empire's established system. While the Sun Lord was alive, this wasn't a major issue, and the war apostles could still summon wind and rain. But after the death of the Sun Lord, there would inevitably be a comprehensive backlash from the entire Empire's established system, which would drive the war apostles into a corner. Without their greatest patron, would the Empire tolerate these war apostles, who could only wield immense power with the prestige of the Sun Lord, to continue holding high positions and usurping the authority of the Empire government? Clearly not. So the question arises, what would the remaining war apostles do? Would they willingly accept their execution? Clearly, that was also not a possibility. Just as Gallardo had tried everything to fight for a way out, the other 40 or so war apostles also each had their own methods and means. By now, 4 or 5 years had passed, and the death of the Sun Lord still had not been made public. The number of people who knew this news for certain was very few, those who guessed, those who felt it, there were many, but nobody had evidence, nor dared to be so certain. Those who believed that the solar expedition was still proceeding vigorously were the overwhelming majority. However, underneath the surface, everything had already begun to move in secret. There were already war apostles who had been purged, along with the series of forces they represented, which crumbled as a result. And some war apostles, especially those ensconced in the Solaria Cosmos domain conquered by the solar expedition and acting as generals, as chief administrators, quickly developed into separatist forces. They also had a lot of dirty laundry to deal with each other. Of the 40 or so war apostles, were their relationships all close comrades in arms? Obviously not. Over the course of the lengthy solar expedition, these colleagues had become friends, but also, due to differences in ideology, personality, and other reasons, many conflicts had formed. While Sun Lord Zuo He was alive, all conflicts were suppressed beneath the surface. Without him, these conflicts began to erupt en masse. Some war apostles wanted to elect a new leader, hoping that the position of Sun Lord would continue to exist and continue to lead the ongoing solar expedition. Some wanted to stop fighting and obey the Empire's orders, some just wanted to independently rule over their territories like local tyrants. But regardless of how much power they inherited, whether they were generals or politicians, whether they were loyal or harbored other intentions, in any case, the Solaria domain had already become a complete mess. Gallardo foresaw these situations and future trends. And he himself was different from those former colleagues. He neither controlled an army nor was he a powerful regional governor. Within the War Apostles, he served as a tax officer, and his biggest reliance was on the authority and prestige of the Sun Lord. He could neither rule over a region nor had the chips to negotiate with the empire. On the contrary, by dealing with taxation and war donations, he had offended numerous people within the empire. Although, the vast majority of them were local officials and lords, without his patron, these officials and real power lords could very easily take his life. However, he also had advantages that his former colleagues did not. Unlike the other war apostles who spent years in the Solaria domain, expanding the empire's borders, Galaraldo's workplace was within the entire empire, especially as he spent a longer time in Holy Terra. After all, he needed to deal with various government departments, particularly the Military Affairs Department and the Department of Taxation. He had many connections. Though in the midst of chaos, networking might seem inconsequential compared to genuine power in hand, but Galaraldo also swiftly analyzed another aspect: if the Solar Expedition Army, no matter how fierce, no matter how much it had concentrated the best of the empire, lost Suo he came himself, they would be nothing but loose sand, incapable of coming together. His colleagues, even though they now possessed powerful legacies, still paled in comparison to the truly infinite power of the empire. He did not know how long the turmoil in Solaria would last, how severe it would be, or even if it might explode into civil war. But he believed that in the end, it would still be the human empire, which had stood for over 10,000 years, that would claim victory. So, the path he chose became very clear. Chapter 665. After arriving at Wuji Star, he took advantage of the time when the Sun Lord's reputation was still intact and the speculation about his death hadn't yet spread widely. With a bit of bluffing, he pulled in some connections and successfully reached out to Holy Terra. In the process, he incidentally helped Gu Hang sort out the alliance's legal procedures. Afterwards, having sorted his connections clearly and put some chips on the table, as well as securing some political assurances, he left Wuji Star and the Eastern Cosmos domain for Holy Terra. What were the chips he offered? There were two things. The first was the political legacy that Suo Hikame had left behind in Holy Terra and throughout the entire Central Empire. In his lifetime, the Sun Lord could be considered the supreme ruler of the entire empire. Apart from the most conspicuous 46 war apostles, he certainly had other confidants, scattered throughout various central departments of Holy Terra and governments in the cosmos domains and star domains of the entire empire. Because of his unique duties, Galaraldo knew these people better than anyone else. This list and his understanding of these individuals, with whom he had even cooperated on many occasions. The considerable time Galaraldo spent on Wuji Star was strategizing to win these people over. He meticulously brought those among them he was familiar with and valued under his command, establishing a tighter connection. Of course, he couldn't subdue everyone, and even the supporters he could rally were at most just the tip of the iceberg among the Sun Lord's supporters. Otherwise, if he could make all these people obey him, he, at the very least, could aim for a seat on the Supreme Council. Those he couldn't subdue still shouldn't be wasted. He would sell the complete list to the central government. Indeed, he sold the list and his understanding of these individuals for a good price. The second was his colleagues on Solaria. He understood the other war apostles very well, precisely what each of them thought, who could be persuaded, who was compelled by circumstances, and who was a true ambitious schemer. Moreover, his relationships with many of them were quite good. After all, during the Sun expedition, as the one profiting from the campaign, he was naturally welcomed by his peers. Understanding and even good relations meant his presence offered Holy Terra a means to divide and address the chaotic situation on Solaria after the death of the Sun Lord. Frankly speaking, he had already convinced one of the war apostles, a marshal, to return with his troops to the Empire. Of course, that was also the marshal's original intention. These two assets highlighted Galaraldo's extraordinary role. Once he clearly showed a willingness to cooperate and leveraged his connections, hugging the right thighs, not only was his life secured, but he also rose rapidly. At this stage, he even managed to secure for Gu Hang the rank of Imperial Lieutenant General along with the Glorious Medal of Honor as a perk. Originally, I wanted to secure for you the rank of General and the Holy Medal, but unfortunately, I couldn't manage it. Securing the rank of Lieutenant General and the Glorious Medal was the best I could do. The affairs of Dragonhawk Star Domain are simply too far from Holy Terra, and many officials here have never even heard of Rage Owl Star, Karolia, or the Tianma Star sector. But don't worry. I've been working hard here in Holy Terra to promote your achievements. A battle group redeemed under the governance of Mr. Gu, savior of 40 billion people, a distinguished and pragmatic politician, a wise ruler. I've approached some newspapers and radio stations, spent quite a bit of money to publicize your reputation. They are also adapting some of your acts, like crushing the cult and saving the world, into new operas to be premiered soon. To be honest, making these happen has not been easy. The people of Terra have heard hero tales from all over the universe, and every hero wants to make a name for themselves here after their deeds. To secure a spot for you in the media and scheduling for the theatre, I've had to push aside several so-called hero stories. I've also asked the most talented playwrights to adapt your deeds with some reasonable dramatization. Please understand, to touch hearts in a place like Terra, we need some twists and turns, incredible stories, and of course, a pinch of romantic elements to act as seasoning and sensory stimulation. Once your fame rises, I can then use these to secure higher military ranks and medals for you, and then we can aim for real benefits. What is it that you want? The head of the Dragonhawk Star Domain? Or maybe the chairman of the Eastern Cosmos Domain? Or perhaps advancing further in the Star Realm Army to become a marshal? Or making progress within the Psychic Cultivators Association? Choose your path, and I will help you strive ahead on that road. I look forward to reuniting with you in Holy Terra in a few decades, and then, we shall advance together. After ending the communication with Galaraldo, Gu Hang sat stupefied in his own chair. This guy was indeed very capable. Not everyone could find a way out on the road of desperation. Galaraldo's response was quick, his decision-making firm, and his action powerful. Retracing the outcome to the process, his ability to not just save his own life but also find his opportunity for advancement in such a situation was certainly a display of capability. And the fact this guy was so friendly towards him was within expectations. Originally, he had meddled with Galaraldo's soul. Leveraging the favor of saving his life and the suggestions implanted in his soul, he made Galaraldo see him as his closest friend. But Gu Hang was also aware that doing so was very risky. Galaraldo's identity meant he would continuously, time and again, undergo relevant spiritual energy checks to ensure his psyche had not been contaminated. For this reason, when manipulating Galaraldo's thoughts, Gu Hang had been very, very cautious, and his actions very, very slight. He dared not alter any of his memories, personality, or cognition. All he could do was plant a seed and let it take root and sprout on its own. The seed dissipated after a short while, leaving behind thoughts that could be considered to have grown from Galaraldo's soul itself. Even so, upon hearing that Galaraldo had gone to Holy Terra, Gu Hang was still a bit worried. He feared that in the heart of the Central Empire, talented individuals emerged in droves, and now that Galaraldo was in a high position, he would be subjected to continuous autonomous or obligatory checks. It would be quite normal if someone discovered something slightly amiss in Galaraldo's soul. The reason Gu Hang made this call was partly to probe and see. However, as things stood, Galaraldo was still stable. The psychics of Holy Terra had not detected anything unusual. Galaraldo still considered him a brother in all but blood. It's just, a bit too enthusiastic. Publicizing my deeds in newspapers, on the radio, and even scripting dramas to play out love and hate, they have to creatively adapt it to enhance the impact, adding twists and intrigue. Gu Hang covered his face, deeply concerned about his reputation. He hadn't created some bizarre spectacle, had he? Gu Hang sighed deeply. Forget it. After all, far away on Holy Terra, even making a phone call was such a hassle, he could not intervene in anything. He just hoped that Galaraldo would be reliable. He quickly reminded himself to stop thinking about such things and to shift his focus to the present. Representatives from the Star Domain and Cosmos Domain had not yet left, but Rage Owl Star was about to welcome a second wave of guests. They were not exactly coming from afar, they were a work group from the Star Sector government departing from Flying Wing Star, tasked with determining the tax assessments for Rage Owl Star, and indeed the entire alliance, for the next 10 years. Chapter 666. Regarding how much tax each world should pay, the Empire had established standards: total population times 0.1 times development coefficient. For planets like Rage Owl Star, Hagian Star, and Corollia, which all have the lowest development coefficient of level 1, they pay 10% of their total population. For a place like Flying Wing Star, with a development coefficient of level 5, it has to pay 50% tax on its total population. This seems simple and clear, but in reality, determining the tax amount for each planet is a very complex matter. First, it is not possible to change this in real time. The Empire's tax fleet can only visit the Tianma Star sector once every 2 years. Some places that are more remote and of lower value might only have a visit every 5 or 10 years. There have even been planets that haven't paid taxes in 100 years and thought they had been forgotten by the Empire, but then suddenly the tax fleet would arrive, demanding 100 years' worth of taxes. Generally speaking, for a planet, it is impossible to calculate the population and the degree of development every year to determine the tax amount. Second, even if confirmed every few years, the accuracy of the population statistics and the reasonableness of the development level assessment are questionable. Even though the Empire has clear and detailed indices for measuring development level, when it comes to each individual world, there are myriad possibilities that require specific case-by-case analysis. Applying these indices robotically is not just inappropriate, it's downright unworkable. In such cases, the statistical counting of the population and the calculation of the development level rely heavily on the ability of the officials and implementers, or to some extent, they can even use their own discretion. And this power has been delegated to the star sector governments. After they finish calculating the data, they will report it to the star domain. If the planetary government disagrees, they also can appeal upwards. Whether the star domain government cares or not is another matter, but the option is there. The star sector governments do not directly collect taxes, nor do they have direct jurisdiction over the various planets in the star sector, and to mobilize forces within the star sector, they have to report to higher authorities. They don't even have a clearly defined military affairs department, legal department, and such structures, though they do have some related functions. However, determining tax amounts remains a significant power and responsibility. The Tianma star sector re-evaluates every 10 years. 1 year later, following the arrival of the tax fleet from the star domain government, the taxation is completed according to the last determined tax amount. After that, the next cycle will be based on the new tax amount. Although there is still 1 year until the tax amount is fixed, the associated work must start now, or there will not be enough time. Owing to the special nature of the Alliance's system and its recognition by the star domain government, the 3 planets under the Alliance are calculated together for their tax amount. Once calculated, reduce it by 40 billion, and that will be the tax to pay over the next 6 years. After 6 years, add the 40 billion back. Gu Heng was initially somewhat worried. His relationship with the star sector government was not too good. After Pei Desi's death, the so-called favor of promotion was gone. During the time when he, the Gu family, and Fufana led the opposition against the disgusting political fight between the then star sector government and the Fatches family, and after completely separating from the star sector government's faction to establish a neutral third faction, the relationship had become even colder, not to mention, later on, when the star sector government wanted to pin the worsening situation of Karolia indefinitely as a crime of the Fatches family, intending to nail them for good, but Gu Heng's takeover of Karolia, though it involved taking this heavily populated planet from the Fatches, also indirectly saved them. If Karolia had remained in the Fatches family's hands and the situation deteriorated to the point where the star domain government had to withdraw the main forces from the front line of the Iron Teeth War to defend, or even be forced to issue an extinction order for Karolia, then Fatches would be done for, certainly facing severe accountability. And it was precisely because of this that the Fatches family, which was really at a loss at that time, was eager to wash their hands of Karolia. Otherwise, Gu Heng would not have been able to take over so quickly. Of course, in this matter, Fatches would not thank Gu Heng, as the Dragonhawk Third Corps had been taken away as well. The star sector government also wouldn't harbor any goodwill towards Gu Heng, and in fact, became even more estranged. Given such circumstances, would the star sector government try to trip him up in determining this round of tax amounts? At least they had the motive. The star domain government was also likely to tacitly agree. For Karolia to be exempt from taxes for 6 years was worth more than 20 billion. The star domain government certainly wouldn't renege, but if the star sector government quietly raised the tax amount, what did that have to do with me? You've already been exempted from more than 20 billion in taxes, what's the problem with paying a little more? But to Gu Heng, this was quite annoying. In reality, though, the anticipated difficulties did not occur. Certainly, Gu Heng would not meet with those work groups himself, but from the reports he received from government officials across the Alliance's 3 stars, he could see that these work groups from the star sector government were quite honest. They neither troubled the local governments nor exhibited any particular distrust that warranted their own investigations. They basically just looked at the data reported by the Alliance government and then approved it. This of course could be considered an act of extending goodwill, which even surprised Gu Heng a little. What exactly did the so-called parliamentary faction currently in power of the star sector government want to do? And soon, an even greater act of goodwill was placed before Gu Heng, Karolia I. Chapter 667. This is one of the 9 planets in the Tianma star sector, and it shares a star system with Carolya 3. In terms of volume and area, it is the largest in the Tianma star sector. In terms of population, it is the smallest. This is a mineral planet with a population of about 10 million, almost all of whom are miners. Along with industries servicing mineral extraction, the planet's orbit features a cargo starport. Although its development coefficient is only 1, it still bears a resource tax, with a fixed amount of 100 million. In fact, the planet's annual output is around 300 million, nearly all from mining, with 100 million paid in taxes, costs of 150 million, and the remaining 50 million can roughly be considered profit. This planet, with its small population and singular output, and being in the same star system as a large planet like Carolya 3, traditionally has its planetary governor concurrently held by the governor of Carolya, and that extra 50 million in revenue is essentially a subsidy for Carolya. When he took over as the Carolya governor, the ownership of Carolya I wasn't explicitly stated. It is now under the interim management of the star sector government. Gu Heng had long wanted to take it back. He was quite eager for this place. As the alliance's large-scale industrial production grew more and more fierce, especially after Carolya's industrial capacity caught up, the consumption of raw materials would increase to a particularly terrifying level. For a mining planet like Carolya I, to those previous worthless governors, indeed there was only 50 million in profit, but in the hands of Gu Heng, it would be different. He couldn't understand how such a large mining planet could yield so little profit in a year. Even if it had been mined for many years and the output had decreased, it still shouldn't be this low. However, before this, Gu Heng felt that this matter was not particularly easy to handle. Those people wouldn't easily hand over Carolya I to him. There might be some complications involved, and further struggles might be necessary to take it into his hands. Unexpectedly, the parliamentary faction of the star sector government just gave it to him just like that. Although they didn't trouble him with the tax assessment and handed over Carolya I to him, these were things that should naturally belong to Gu Heng. But given the nature of those from the parliamentary faction, it obviously wouldn't be that simple. In the world, nothing is ever rightfully yours. The generosity of those people made Gu Heng deeply ponder. He hardly expended any effort and guessed a reason. It was nothing but the fatches. To be honest, Gu Heng had little respect for the intentions of the parliamentary faction. Initially, they preferred to let Carolya's situation deteriorate rather than working together and undermining the fatches, which Gu Heng found quite contemptible. Back then, Gu Heng truly couldn't be bothered to get involved with them, helping neither side. But now the situation had changed, and it was time to shift his thinking and consider the problem from the perspective of a pure profit-seeking animal. The fatches, now that was a juicy piece of meat. Carolya was their major victory over these years, as they finally extended their influence beyond their 3 planets. But it was also their most painful defeat. Not only was their reaching claw chopped off, but they also lost their greatest asset, the Dragonhawk Third Corps. They are now, arguably, at their weakest. Such a piece of meat, who wouldn't want to take a bite? However, what Gu Heng wanted was not just to suppress them on a small scale, nor even to target the Fatches family. He wanted those 3 planets. The Fatches Tristar, located in the same star system, was the cradle of the Fatches family, with a total population of 10 billion evenly distributed across the 3 planets. The development grade of these 3 planets is 2. Even Gu Heng thought his appetite might be a bit too big. And this could not be made public. Who would let him have them? However, after making careful calculations, he found it was not impossible. It all depended on how to operate it. Gu Heng gathered some people for a secret meeting and discussed many specific measures and methods in detail. The attendees included officers from the Alliance Foreign Affairs Department as well as candidates from the Demon Hunter organization under the jurisdiction of the legal system. Besides internal anti-corruption efforts, the Demon Hunters also deal extensively with foreign intelligence. Now, the Demon Hunter organization was not solely comprised of individuals trained by Gu Heng through military badges. It had evolved into an important espionage and intelligence agency for the Alliance. To act against the Fatches, the work of the diplomatic corps and the special service organs was indispensable. Gu Heng hoped to know whether these 2 departments of the Alliance were prepared for such an undertaking. And the response he received left him quite satisfied. Flying Wing Star, Governor's Residence. After ending the call with Gu Heng, Ivan Martinelli felt utterly exhausted. He hesitated, but still could not resist asking the young Paydesi beside him, "Did you feel that Gu Heng was deliberately provoking you just now?" Paydesi was still somewhat indignant. Of course. He said I was nowhere near as good as my brother. Weren't those words just meant to trouble me on purpose? And have you thought about why he would deliberately provoke you? What other purpose could there be? Paydesi gritted his teeth. He has no intention of cooperating. You shouldn't have been so polite to him, even somewhat obsequious. In my opinion, he's even worse than the Fatches. Martinelli sighed deeply. He now felt that the words Gu Hang had spoken earlier were not meant to provoke anyone, but perhaps the truth had been inadvertently spoken. But he could only hold it in and be careful not to be careless. Meanwhile, Paydesi grew even more presumptuous. Let's deal with this Gu Hang first. Martinelli, inwardly frustrated, grew stern. Deal with Gu Hang? With what do you propose to deal with him? Without waiting for Paydesi to speak, the Star Sector leader continued. His victory in the war has earned him immense fame throughout the entire Star Sector. The Gu clan along with the neutral faction led by Fufina, combining naval power and the influence of the Empire Commerce Guild in the sector, have the final say once you leave the planetary surface. He is now the favored protege of General Lois, and the Star Domain Military Affairs Department has even seen the potential of his Rage Bear Legion. There are plans to expand the Rage Bear Legion by 20 times, a scheme that includes countless budgets and interests. The former war apostle who has been looking favorably upon him is now the deputy director of the Central Military Department of the Empire, having secured him the rank of Imperial Major General and the Glorious Medal. In the whole Star Sector, only old Fufina has ever received such a grade of accolade. On the political level, from the Star Sector to the Star Domain and up to the central government of the Empire, his connections span everywhere. With such a background, what do we have to topple him with? Paydesi was still not convinced. He's just a greenhorn. What? Someone dares to call him a greenhorn even now? I don't care what you truly think, but remember, Paydesi, you must show him respect in every setting. He is the lawful master of 3 now 4 worlds, his allegiance is triply recognized from the Star Domain to the Cosmos Domain to the Central Empire, he rules over more than 40 billion people, Hagian Star has food production, industrial output on Rage Owl Star is skyrocketing, Corollia possesses an endless population. Behind him must be the support of the sect of mechanics, numerous mysterious technologies of unknown origin, helping him rapidly develop his worlds. His army is the most combat-ready and numerous in the Star Sector, innumerable mid- and high-level Navy officers, captains of the Tianma fleet are protégés and officials from the family of his fiancée. He has become a person not to be offended in the Tianma Star Sector, as well as our sole choice for an ally now. Paydesi's face turned ashen, and he remained silent. And Martinelli, having said so much in one breath, felt as though a stone weighed heavily upon his chest, stifling him. The two men looked at each other in silence. Eventually, he let out a long sigh. Don't be in a hurry, Paydesi, don't be in a hurry. Once we get our hands on the Fatches Tri-Star, then we'll have the capital to fight Gu Hang again. Chapter 668. Iron Curtain Queen, it's been a long time. Isabel waved her hand and said, there's no queen anymore, just call me Isabel. I wouldn't dare be so disrespectful, even if we are both in a foreign land now, in Nyoyan City, you are still the queen. Just working for the governor, Isabel said. Thanks to the support from all sides, Nyoyan City has become one of the first nest capitals to initially complete reforms after Minjian City, and you've been a great help in this process. Without you, King Eureka, and the titans you led personally, the knights deterring those with disloyal hearts, I would have faced more troubles. The person in front of Isabel was her fellow countryman, also from Hagian Star, the current king of Panbo's kingdom and also the leader of the Alliance National Knights. By comparison, Isabel, once a ruler of another realm on Hagian Star, had a status no less significant, now a manager on Corollia of a nest capital. Before this, they were not well acquainted. After all, Eureka was just a prince back then, while Isabel was already the queen of the kingdom of Stefano, they merely knew there was such a person, without any special contact. But now, as both found themselves in a foreign land and with similar backgrounds as former rulers now serving the alliance, they felt a sort of comradeship. As it happened, Eureka's mission had brought him to Nyoyan City, which was under Isabel's management. After completing his official duties, he came up with the idea to visit his fellow countrymen, leading to the present meeting. Eureka said, since you don't want me to call you queen, then stop calling me king. Here we are just 2 fighters for the alliance. The only difference between us is the way we fight. I pilot Knight Mecha, and you are on the front lines as a manager. Yes, you're right, Isabel agreed, then after thinking added a word of caution, but even though the governor has given us full freedom, we still need to have some self-awareness. No matter how righteous we feel in our hearts, our identities inevitably mean we cannot act rashly, so we need to be even more cautious within the Alliance's system. We should not have had this meeting, some within the Alliance may take issue with it, and it might even give people back on our home planet, those who cannot see the reality and future clearly, some undue thoughts, she cautioned. Eureka rubbed his face, looking somewhat weary. He said, I know I've been mocked as a traitor in the past, for betraying my homeland. I've also encountered those who said I harbored ulterior motives, unable to forget my home country. I completely understand, this is what our identities entail. We are both former rulers and now authorities within the Alliance. But is this our sin? I never understood that. Enough, Isabel raised her hand, stopping Eureka from going on. I don't want to continue this topic, let's talk about something else. Eureka exhaled deeply, all right, I spoke too much. We really shouldn't dwell too much on this topic. Let's talk about something else, something cheerful. I heard that from places like Minjian City, Nyoyan City, a lot of people have migrated to our homeland, to Rage Owl Star. That's right, it is indeed a persistent effort made by all the nest capitals. Since we gained control of Karolia 2 years ago, it's estimated that over 1.5 billion people have migrated between the two stars. Rage Owl Star took on more, about 1 billion, Hagian Star, somewhat less, only 500 million, she confirmed. Eureka was astounded and took a moment to recover before saying, I expected a lot, but not this much. Wouldn't that make Rage Owl Star entirely occupied by Karolia people? Even Hagian Star would be at least half filled with Karolia people. You're right, she affirmed. Doesn't the Alliance worry? Such a huge change in the demographic structure. Won't the people from those stars themselves have objections? He asked. Of course, there are objections, but not as strong as you might think. There were too few people on Rage Owl Star, there are so many new factories requiring a large workforce, and what objections could the indigenous people have? Their quality of life isn't affected at all, but instead, due to the population growth, they're seeing a broader market, more low-end labor, and a more vibrant society. She delineated. Rage Owl Star, after gaining sufficient population, even started looking towards what was once no man's land, 2 other continents filled with low-energy storms. It might not be feasible to establish factories there, or densely populated residential areas, or agricultural production, but the low energy itself has been deemed valuable. The low-energy storms that shrouded the deserted continents of Rage Owl Star have been subsiding year by year, and after the cessation of those storms, the spiritualized gas fields are likely to reappear. Those 2 continents need more people to settle and develop them, she explained. On Hagian Star, it's much the same, the newly arrived Karolia people have been entering the lands of the past lords, now farm owners and landlords, adding labor, increasing arable land. Those former nobles are quite pleased, they now have cheaper and more sufficient manpower, even though they've transitioned from past landlords into managers distributing profits based on rank. The political achievements they need to upgrade are measured by output size and managed population. More labor means more land can be cultivated, which of course makes them happy, she expounded. Chapter 669. As for the common serfs, they are agricultural workers now. But no matter what they're called, or at what time, their opinions have never been the most important. Moreover, among the Karolia people who migrated to Hagian Star, the most common destinations were either the factories in the 4 major industrial centers or the many newly built farms, going to the borders of the various kingdoms to reclaim land. Did you know that on the coastline of your Panbos kingdom, a freshwater factory center has been established? Surrounding this new industrial center, several industrial cities have sprung up. Seawater desalination and the construction of water resource pipelines to the newly built starport a few years ago have been undertaken as a means of freshwater export, relieving Karolia's water resources pressure. Taking advantage of the resources from seawater desalination, many vertical farms have been built, utilizing soilless cultivation technology for large-scale food production. Talking about these things, Mrs. Iron Curtain became quite talkative. Especially when it came to the changes in Hagian Star, she spoke as if reciting treasures from her own home. Eureka listened attentively, and at the end, he said, "You still care a lot about Hagian Star." Isabel paused, and this time she did not avoid the subject. Yes, of course, after all, it's my home planet. Since I ascended to the position of queen, I have had no family, and now the only ties I have left are my 2 daughters, who are currently studying at the Comprehensive Academy on Rage Owl Star. The only other thing that I have left to care about is my mother planet, my homeland. Do you think the changes in your mother planet and homeland are good? Of course, under the Alliance's rule, it is becoming stronger and more prosperous, there's no doubt about that. Isabel's words were decisive. Eureka let out a sigh of relief. He opened his mouth as if to say something more, but at that moment, the communicator he wore suddenly rang. He put on the earpiece, listened for a few moments, and his expression quickly turned serious. He said to Isabel, "Iron Curtain Queen, thank you for taking time out of your day to talk with me. However, I must leave now, there's an urgent mission requiring assembly." Isabel stood up, "You're welcome. Aren't you curious about what it is?" "Curious, but I know that what should not be asked, what should not be said, should not be known. If I need to know, I will soon find out, won't I?" "Yes," said Eureka, "you indeed will receive news of this matter very soon, so it's no big deal for me to tell you a bit earlier, the Fatches family has rebelled." Now, Isabel was truly shocked. "Rebellion? Do you mean the kind of rebellion I'm thinking of?" "Yes, they have betrayed the Empire. This is really bad news for anyone. I must go now, goodbye, ma'am." "Goodbye." After saying goodbye to Eureka, Isabel sat at her desk, digested the news of the Fatches family's rebellion, and then picked up pen and paper to start writing a report titled Report on Communication with Alliance National Knights Commander Eureka. Gu Heng glanced at the report, but its contents did not concern him much. Such trivial matters were not worth his attention. Whether it was Isabel's little schemes or Eureka's feelings, he did not think much of them. Isn't it normal to feel a little melancholic? As long as he focused on his work, Gu Heng couldn't care less about those thoughts. Of course, just because he didn't take it seriously didn't mean no one else in the alliance did. The Ministry of Internal Affairs, under the legal institutions, would pay attention to this matter. The note Gu Heng wrote on the report was also to alert the Ministry of Internal Affairs. Afterward, he turned his attention to matters of real significance. The Fatches Rebellion. It was an event he had helped facilitate, but the current situation was somewhat beyond his expectations. In the original plans, although there was mention of the possibility of a Fatches rebellion, it was considered unlikely. Yet, that scenario had occurred. A little over a year ago, a work group from the Star Sector government, while measuring development levels and conducting population statistics for the Alliance, made significant concessions. Open falsification was out of the question, as the imperial tax needed to be secured, and the Imperial Taxation Department would have officials review and even conduct field inspections. Discovering any discrepancies could cause major problems for the Star Sector government. But even when adhering to regulations, there were many loopholes to exploit. Development levels for Corollia, Rage Owl Star, and Hagian Star were kept at level 1. This was not really reasonable, but it was within the rules. The shipyard on Rage Owl Star was obviously a place with huge potential, but at the time the Star Sector government did their accounting, the shipyard was still expanding. Although a part of it was about to be completed, and even cargo ships like the Eureka could already be built, the expansion was not yet finished. Rage Owl Star, which could have been rated at development level 2 or even 3, took advantage of a timing difference and remained at level 1. The same logic applied to Hagian Star. Under Gu Heng's management for 5 years, it transformed from a purely agricultural planet to one with an even more advanced agricultural output due to industrial intervention. The establishment of several industrial centers also meant it had a substantial industrial output. It could have been rated at level 2. But the level was relaxed slightly, maintaining it at development level 1. As for population, just before the mass migration in Corollia, a timing difference was exploited. Rage Owl Star was registered with only 200 million people, although a billion followed in the next year. Hagian Star was registered with 600 million, which also expanded to a billion the following year. Chapter 670. As for Corollia, having a development level maintained at grade 1 is reasonable, but in terms of population, the Star Sector government has almost completely recognized the statistics from the Alliance. Currently, the officially registered population of Corollia has dropped to 36.4 billion. The fall of an entire nest capital in Pheno City, along with the population losses brought about by years of war, plagues, and cult activities, is tremendous, conservatively estimated at a loss of 2 billion people. The other 2 billion loss was during the period when the Fatches family controlled Corollia, due to a large scale of human trafficking and resource exchange, leading to the decrease of the population. From this perspective, during the few years the Fatches family was in power, they managed to sell off a population worth 100 billion tax currency. With 100 billion thrown in, Karolia should have improved, right? But it didn't. Firstly, the Fatches didn't sell off as much as 100 billion, there were plenty of people profiting from the disaster at that time, even Gu Heng was among them, who didn't pay 5 tax currency per person when trafficking humans, at most it was 1 tax currency, or even lower. Moreover, the Fatches family had done a lot of underhanded dealings, whether in the sale of the population or investment in Karolia, the accounts had problems. And this had become the evidence of the Fatches family's crimes over the past year. A year ago, the Star Sector government made huge concessions to Gu Heng on the issue of designated taxes and the ownership of Karolia I, in exchange for Gu Heng's help. Gu Heng provided evidence from Blackbird Heavy Industries that core members of the Fatches family were involved with the Smart Mechanisms rebellion, and there was evidence that the Fatches family was aware of this. Gu Heng tallied the accounts from the years Karolia was under control of the Fatches, and obtained the recognition of the Star Sector government, which believed that the Fatches family obtained huge illegal benefits during their reign over Karolia III, were seriously corrupt, and directly caused the severe deterioration of the Karolia issue, eventually leading to the near-extinction crisis of Karolia. If it wasn't so, there would be no need for the alliance to take over and enforce a 6-year militarized zone. According to statistical data, the Fatches family caused the empire to lose more than 100 billion tax currency on Karolia. Don't worry about how they calculated it, the Star Sector government has determined it so, and it was confirmed by the Karolia Planetary government. No matter how the Fatches family defended themselves, this report was already submitted. Gu Heng played his part in this, having made a special call to Lois, at the same time, as someone parachuted into the Tianma Star Sector, a former official of the Star Domain government, and even a member of a significant political faction within the Star Domain, the parliamentary faction, Martinelli also mobilized his connections. This report of a loss of 100 billion was thus recognized, and the Star Domain government issued a punishment decree to the Fatches family, fining them 100 billion tax currency, to be paid within 10 years. There were some smaller acts as well, such as the Star Sector government being particularly harsh on Fatches in tax assessments. Originally, all 3 planets had a development level of 2, but now they were all assessed as having a development level of 3. The Fatches 3 planets, with a total population of 10 billion, originally had an annual tax amount of 2 billion, which has now increased to 3 billion, they need to pay 100 billion in fines over 10 years. This means, in 10 years, Fatches will have to pay out 130 billion tax currency to the empire. This was practically a death sentence. According to estimates, all the population on the Fatches Tri-Star, without eating or drinking, could save up 200 billion in 10 years. But how could they possibly not eat or drink? This was definitely a heavy blow. It was to push the Fatches family to their demise. That was the intention of the Star Sector government. Even so, staging a rebellion was the most unreasonable course of action. Firstly, they still had room for political maneuvers. There are ways to not pay, and stubbornly staging a rebellion was the most absurd. They could have delayed the payment, mobilized their political power, continued to plead with higher authorities, and issue threats. The Star Domain and Space Domain governments are very likely to not want to get involved, nor are they that greedy. They might consider reducing the fine. If they really pushed you into rebellion, dealing with 3 rebelling planets would be quite a hassle. The sustainability of the empire is indeed at risk, not just something Gu Heng made up, but to some extent, it is a fact. Rebellions erupt one after another, threats from aliens, threats from cults, issues inherent to the empire itself. The empire, despite its size and strength, faces too many problems. If the Fatches really rebelled, then forget the fine, tax revenue would be uncollectible, and how much would it cost to quell the rebellion? It would be better to placate them, reduce the fine, and make something out of it. Secondly, for Fatches, even if the fine isn't reduced by a single cent, 130 billion in 10 years, although painful, even perhaps fundamentally damaging, is not something they completely can't come up with. Tightening their belts, they have controlled the Fatches Tri-Star for so many years, they couldn't possibly have no savings. In the next few years, if they loot more aggressively, they really could come up with the sum of over 100 billion. Yet, they chose the most extreme method, to hell with it, I'm rebelling. But Gu Heng could understand the reason behind it. They didn't really plan to become independent, rather, they seemed more inclined to stimulate negotiations through fighting, waiting for a chance to be coaxed back into the fold. Additionally, the Alliance's diplomatic and intelligence efforts over the past year also played a quite crucial role. The Star Sector government and the Star Domain government may not want the Fatches to really rebel.